everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I am Jen. This is Fundy Fridays, and here on my channel I talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism, American conservative politics, pop culture, gay stuff, and today we are talking about missionary organizations, which does involve some gay stuff, but not in a good way. Sorry, I know it's Pride Month, but there's a lot of homophobia out there. Can you believe it? Can you believe that we're going to encounter some homophobia and transphobia in a evangelical missionary organization? I know, I wish we didn't live in a world like that, but we do. And today, we're going to be talking about missionary organizations, specifically like youth missionary organizations. Notably, we're going to be talking about Surf the Nations, which is an offshoot of Youth with a Mission, and we're going to be talking about Cru, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ. We're going to be talking about all the major ones, and we're going to give a little bitty, teeny tiny, like not at all raised religious, have actually no idea what I'm talking about, history of Christian missions. So yeah, I will also be joined in this video by my friend Erin Raimondi, and they're a really cool person, and you might have seen them on TikTok, and we're going to be talking about HUT, which is a Harding University, which is another Christian college. They have like a training camp for missionaries, and it gets problematic. So we're going to be talking to them later, and as for now, I guess I'm going to catch you up a little bit before we super dive in. This script is very long, and I've already written out my chapters, and we have 12, and we're going to be talking about 9 organizations. I also am going to be paraphrasing a lot of people's stories. I'm going to try and touch on some of the major stuff that's happened with some of these. And today I am not going to be talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormon missionaries, or even really talking about modern Catholic missionaries. I will be talking about like the history of the Christian church, so obviously I'm going to be talking about Catholicism a little bit, but I'm not really focusing on those groups today, mainly because I really feel like they deserve their own episode. Like, there's a lot going on with those groups in particular, and especially because they're kind of seen as, you know, maybe the black sheep of the Christian family, and so the people that I'm talking about today generally would be against those religions, and they would try to convert you to their thing, to non-denominational or Baptist. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to be talking about Surf the Nations, and one of the founders of that is ex-Mormon, and they actually have done mission trips to Utah to convert Mormons away from the LDS. So, you know what I mean? Like, we got people like the Duggars going to Central America to try and convert Catholics into being Baptists. Like, I don't think that's right, but that's what happens. And so they kind of are seen as an other within this culture. Does that make sense? Some of the things that a lot of these groups have in common, including the ones I just mentioned, they do have a lot of the same problems. Notably, one, you have the furthering of colonialism and rampant white saviorism in some of these groups, but you also have abuse towards the missionaries themselves. Their labor is 100% exploited. They have to raise their own money. A lot of them, pretty much all of them, are spiritually abused in one way or another. Of course, many of these groups have hired abusers, like, and known about it, and tried to keep it under wraps. We have all kinds of horror stories with abuse towards the people they're trying to help. Of course, there's problems with, you know, short-term mission trips where the people often don't even have time to help anybody. You see a lot of that. You see a lot of these groups referred to as cults because of how high control it is, about how you have to, like, confess your sins in front of a whole group. There's all this peer pressure, there's groupthink, there's people trying to, like, outdo each other with spiritual experiences. Like, it's just a pressure cooker environment, and it's just, I haven't really seen any of these missionary groups that I would, you know, recommend to anybody. There's a lot of problems with a lot of them, and there's also good stuff too. You always see that whenever I see people talking about their experience, especially online. Like, there's always the people that come in and say, well, you know what, that was just your experience. I had a great time. And, what you're doing is actually going to divide people. What you're doing is going to get people in trouble. Like, this is quite literally a mission from God. And you're interfering with that because you're, talking about your bad experience. And there's just so much, like I said, peer pressure, toxic culture. People talk about, they say stuff like biblical gaslighting. Like, this is very serious when we're talking about missionary work, or even just like service missions, or serving the community, homeless shelters, soup kitchens, food banks. A lot of that stuff is being done by local churches. There are communities that don't have mutual aid or secular organizations or social services even. A lot of that stuff is done by churches, and yes, they do discriminate. Not all of them. I wanted to say there are really good groups out there, but a lot of times that's somebody's only option because the social services, the budget for it has just been cut, or there isn't a good community that can catch people when they fall. Like, there just isn't sometimes. And especially in places like the US, the church has wanted to be like, the church as a voting bloc and as a institution wanted to be the only place that people could get social services. They don't want the government to pay for this stuff or to be in charge of these things. They want their people doing it. They want their group doing it, because they want to control how it's done, obviously. They see that that's their role, and that's why you get, I think Jerry Falwell was big into this, because he had like an unwed teenage mother's home, and because he wanted to be able to be the one to do it. He didn't want the government to come in. He didn't want the communism to win, and so you have to consider that. And I'm not saying that that's overwhelmingly good or bad. It's just a fact that is how some people have the only way to get resources, the only way to get help, is to go to these religious sources. And I'm sure most of the people who do these kinds of things are doing it just for the love of their fellow man, for their community. They want to do good. There's always that, Jesus lurking over their shoulder. I also wanted to say that I am not judging anyone who's ever gone on a mission trip or who's ever been a missionary, because I know that you did it for a good reason. You wanted to help people. Otherwise, why would you be there? Especially some of the things that happen to these missionaries. Like, they are working their asses off. And yes, there is that implication, that there are people that are there to solely just convert people, but they actually do try and help a lot. And it's not their fault that the system is so messed up. It's not their fault that they are sold these mission trips as these like ways to travel the world and help your fellow man and love on people and be Christ-like. Like, I can totally see why that would be appealing. And especially, it really is sold to young people like it's an alternative to doing like an internship or going to college even. A lot of them say like, why wouldn't you want to spend your gap year doing this? You get to help people. And I understand why people do it. And I understand that it's also a part of people's religion, like is, talked about in Christianity, go out and make disciples. Like, I get it. If that was a sincerely held religious belief and I was fed all this media and told that it was this amazing experience and you're going to grow closer to God and you're going to make friends and you're going to see the world and you're going to help people, it sounds amazing, right? And so today I want to shift the focus not on individual people, because I know a lot of you have gone on mission trips and I don't want you to feel like this is like a negative space. I want you to be able to talk about your experience, and good or bad, and I don't want you to feel like I'm judging you or saying that I hate you or that you're a bad person. The fact that you were trying to go help people is amazing, but I want to talk about the organizations today, the leadership, the toxic culture, and people that we're going to punch up. Like, I don't care what the president of Crew has to say about anything. Like, we're going to talk about the stuff that matters. I think we have to start in the beginning. And specifically, we are going to be talking about Christian missionaries today. I'm aware that there are people who spread religion in other religions. And it's definitely, like I talk about, there is going to be some white saviorism and some racism, but this is not at all an exclusively white European thing. Like, this is a whole phenomenon. Okay, so you know Jesus. You've heard of him. Little known guy, real indie. So he had all that drama. I get away with blasphemy every week in front of all my Jesus posters. Well, he died, and as you do, a few years later, the artist formerly known as Saul, we'll call him Paul today, he never met Jesus, but he ended up being one of the most prolific and important members of Christianity. And I'm sure most of you already know this, but be nice to me. This stuff is brand new to me. Paul was eventually arrested, as it was not allowed to be Christian at the time. And his letters to the different groups that made up the fledgling Christian church make up the Pauline epistles, or the letters of Paul, which make up 13 books of the New Testament. And there is dispute over whether he wrote all of those, but that's where you get a lot of the, how do I put this nicely? A lot of the theology that fundamentalist Christians follow. And I'm not saying that, like, other people don't follow these things, but when we're talking about a different Paul, we're talking about this Paul. And we're not talking about Les Paul either. He actually used to persecute Christians until one day he was on his way to Damascus and he saw a vision of Jesus and he converted right then and there. Anyway, him and his buddy Barnabas went about spreading the gospel. A bunch of other crazy shit happened in the Bible describing their journey, and since I don't really know a lot about it, and since some of it is based in the supernatural, I don't want to talk about it as if it's fact. So instead, I'm going to talk over this video, which is Paul's journey, and it's also confusing because these places are obviously not still named what they were in the Bible, but this video is actually a show called What's in the Bible, which is a Phil Vischer show. Phil Vischer was the co-creator of VeggieTales, and obviously there's a little plane that's driving on this animation, but Paul did not have a plane. So anyway, and they are considered by some people to be the very first Christian missionaries. I tend to agree. That's why I started here. And there are quite a few Bible verses that you will see when it comes to spreading the gospel, missionary work, all that. One of those is the Great Commission, and this is not from the Bible. This is from Wikipedia. In Christianity, the Great Commission is the instruction of the resurrected Jesus Christ to his disciples to spread the gospel to all the nations of the world. The Great Commission is outlined in Matthew 28:16 through 20, where on a mountain in Galilee, Jesus calls on his followers to make disciples of and baptize all nations in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So yeah, I get it. That's, if the main guy tells you to do it, you got to do it, Acts 13 is where the action really starts. Maybe I did a little pun there. I obviously don't know a lot about church history, but after this, there was a lot of death and murders, and just a lot of drama. Just a lot of drama in the Bible. And then in church history, which I still don't know very much about, we've got schisms and councils, and later on we have reformations and all that stuff. It's fun. It's cunt, really. When Jesus said, you need to serve, you know what he was talking about. I would be a great, Unitarian youth group leader. I'd come in with all the Drag Race references. I had James write this part for me, so shout out James. Moving forward in time a bit, we can see the fruit of these efforts, fruit of the Spirit, first coming into real bloom with the Christian conversion of Roman Emperor Constantine in the early part of the 4th century CE. Constantine famously saw a vision of his armies winning in battle while wielding shields emblazoned with the Greek letters Chi and Rho, the beginning of the Greek word for Christ. After painting the shields and converting of the faith, Constantine would go in to win said battle and help further unite the Roman Empire under his new Christian faith, signing the Edict of Milan and legalizing Christianity in the empire. And in fact, there's also evidence to support the idea that this empire unification element of Constantine's conversion was the real driving force behind the entire event, with Christianity allowing him to bypass the divisive Roman pantheon and thus solidify his own political power under a much more unified spiritual force. Christianity, and particularly the propagation of Christian beliefs to new foreign territories, being exploited by government and military forces for their own gain, put a pin in that one because we will definitely be seeing it come back around later. Actually, our buddy Constantine was pivotal in the First Council of Nicaea, which is where we get the Nicene Creed, which was a meeting of the bishops at the time, and they were trying to figure out and agree on many of the main beliefs of Christianity, such as the Holy Trinity and how that was going to work out, because different groups were interpreting that differently. And, we're getting into the weeds here, but yeah, I actually scrolled a little bit farther into the misconceptions section of this Wikipedia page. Despite Constantine's sympathetic interest in the church, he was not baptized until some 11 or 12 years after the council, putting off baptism as long as he did so as to be absolved from as much sin as possible. Excuse me? Later on, in the 1000s. That's not how I would say that. Anyway, what I was trying to say is that in 1054 we have the Great Schism, or the East-West Schism, which is where the church split off into Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Also, I just found out that Peter, the apostle, he was also one of the disciples. He was the first bishop of Rome, aka the first pope. And apparently Jesus gave him this special role. Now, there's obviously been a lot of discussions and fighting in the church on how to proceed from there, but I just thought that was interesting, and he also was crucified, so R.I.P. Also, a little bit later, can you tell I recorded this video a week before I did the voiceover? By a little bit later, I mean 1,000 years, like more than 1,000 years since the events of Jesus's life in the Bible. 300 is where we start dealing with the Nicene Council and Constantine. 1095 to the Crusades, I believe there were 8 of them, and these were religious wars, and a lot of people died. These happened between 1095 and 1291, so that is over 200 years. So isn't that fun? And by fun, I mean not fun at all. A little while later, in 1492, Columbus... That's right, he sailed the ocean blue. Not only that, but he raped, pillaged, and forcefully converted the local people groups that he claimed to have discovered. Does that make him a missionary? Well, it makes him a bad person. Likewise, the Catholic Church fully endorsed and participated in these colonial conversion efforts. Through his 1493 Inter Cetera, which means among other works, Pope Alexander VI, in particular, granted Spain the right to colonize any territory it wanted, but only insofar as the conversion of the native populations was a primary goal of the expedition. And as a part of this, Columbus actually had several Catholic priests accompany him to Spanish colonies as early as the second voyage that very same year in 1493, allowing for the church to establish its foothold in the supposed New World. Of course, we know it wasn't new, and there were people living there, and they were brutally killed, among other horrible things, because of this. I'm going to call him a bozo. You're a real bozo, Christopher Columbus. I know I keep focusing on things in kind of a North American context, but that's what I learned about in school, even though it was, they didn't really tell us the real truth. But yeah, just letting you know that not everything has to do with Christopher Columbus, although he is on my shit list. There were missions all over the world. Sometimes missionaries would go on their own. Other times they would go representing a government. And a lot of these places, government and the religious orders were very much linked. And so that's where a lot of the funds for this kind of thing happened. When you exploit people, you make more money than God. And that's why there are no ethical billionaires. But very long story cut extremely short. Christianity and colonization are linked together like two peas in a pod, because Christianity has often been used as an excuse to colonize people, to exploit them. And we will talk a little bit more about that and like race science in a few minutes. Just, I wanted to touch base here. Likewise, we can't forget that even these earliest missionary endeavors were usually financed by politically motivated European nobility, lending the legitimacy of Christ to those who sought to colonize occupied land and subjugate native peoples. And if we're going in pseudo-chronological order, then I want to talk about this massive event in Christianity that happened in 1517, and that would be Martin Luther's 95 Theses. Yeah, you probably know about this. This is where Protestants come from because they were protesting the Catholic Church over a lot of different things, indulgences, you name it. So I found out that this depiction of Martin Luther in this big victorious scene where he hammers his complaints on this big door did not happen. Although it is an amazing story and inspired other people to nail their complaints onto cathedral doors. So, and I guess that's what makes it the perfect story. And I think at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. We are now going to jump ahead a few hundred years. And things would only become more terrible and exploitative moving into the 18th century when we can first see the development of these modern missionary ideologies starting to take place, perhaps most notably through the work of William Carey.
God raised up a man by the name of William Carey, who had a great burden for worldwide evangelization. William Carey, in various ways, emphasized to the people of his day that it was the responsibility of the churches of England to evangelize the world. He, along with several other local pastors, organized the First Baptist Missionary Organization. Carey himself went to India as a missionary. He, along with several others who went to India, won people to the Lord. They established churches. They built hospitals and schools. Even today in our church, we have people that were saved as a result of the ministry of William Carey.
He wrote an essay, An Inquiry into the Obligations of Christians to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathens, which led to the founding of the Baptist Missionary Society. He also founded several universities in India. He spoke several languages, and he also translated the Hindu classic, the Ramayana, into English. There's also William Carey University that may or may not have fired a professor for being too liberal. But yeah, anyway, a very important person in missionary history. He kind of pioneered the communal living style of missionaries as well as some service-based missionary stuff and, learning the language, living amongst the people. But he also was a man of the time, and he was 19 when he married his 13-year-old wife. He abandoned her while she was pregnant and had small children at home to go live in India. Carey came back shortly after that because his partner had some debts to settle, but eventually he did convince his wife to go. She got to bring her sister as well, but they were having a terrible time because she had just given birth. She was very young. She was in a completely different continent than what she was used to, and she had no rights because she was a woman in the late 1700s. She went, according to William Carey, insane. This article says that she was having delusions that he was cheating on her, but I wouldn't consider that delusional. But eventually he did write in his diary that she thought she was insane, but that didn't stop him from having another baby with her, and I say it that way because she didn't have a choice in the matter. And she died shortly after her baby died, and her husband locked her away in a room. And then William Carey married another woman. Isn't that a great story? I also want to talk about the Atlantic slave trade, and so that went on for over 400 years and involved more than just the United States. Christian slave owners justified their crimes against humanity by cherry-picking the Bible and finding passages they believed to be pro-slavery. Of course, they were backed up by a very racist society and, of course, plenty of pro-slavery legislation, so they slept pretty well at night. There were also Bibles made for enslaved people that specifically had parts removed talking about liberation from oppression because they didn't want to incite a rebellion. And how fucked up is that? If you ask me, I don't know how anybody can claim to be a part of a religion that views all men as equal could justify owning and abusing another human being, but makes you think. Also, many racist slave owners in the South, not only did they not think of them as human beings, not worthy of religion, but they didn't want enslaved people to convert to Christianity because they thought then they would rebel. I wanted to make sure that I state that many enslaved and free Black people chose to convert on their own. Many people found liberation in their religious beliefs, and there is a far more complex history of Black people's relation to Christianity that I'm not going to touch today, mostly because I am not very educated in the subject. I am trying my best to learn, but instead I want to draw attention to the AME, or the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was founded by Richard Allen in 1794 and was the first independent Protestant denomination to be founded by Black people. Before that, they had to sit in the back of segregated white churches and sometimes even had to go to their own separate services entirely. I just wanted to bring that up because I wasn't exactly giving you the full picture. There were splitting of different denominations and churches, like northern churches who predominantly opposed slavery and southern ones who supported it. And these were some of the things that really put the pressure on splitting things. I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention was formed in 1845 as the Church of the Southern Slaveholders, and they're still dealing with the ramifications of that history rooted in racism. I'm trying to give you the full picture here. There definitely were Christians who were doing the right thing, and there were definitely Christians who were not. Kind of like today. Likewise, there were also denominations that were opposed to slavery, like the Quakers, who have maintained a consistent position against all forms of slavery dating back to their inception in the 17th century. Of course, Christianity has also been used to justify instances of anti-slavery too. John Brown comes to mind, but also people like Nat Turner. And with that, I want to talk about what happened with the indigenous people of North America. Native Americans were also forcefully converted, relocated, abused, killed, scapegoated, exploited, everything under the guise of civilizing them. And a part of that meant converting them to Christianity. But especially during the rise of race science and eugenics, colonizers genuinely believed that certain ethnic groups and civilizations were literally less than human and they needed to be parented. They were literally called the child races. There was a phrase that was used to describe what would happen to these people. I don't even want to say it. And then there was also this concept of the white man's burden. And I guess this comes from a poem from 1899 written by Rudyard Kipling, and it was published in the Times of London. He was talking about this in relation to the Philippines being colonized. And this is from Webster's Dictionary. A duty formally asserted by white people to manage the affairs of non-white people whom they believe to be less developed. Along with these other horribly racist ideas, the civilizing mission, usually you see this as Mission Civilisatrice. Obviously, I don't speak French, and I just made that up. So anyway, the civilizing mission is a political rationale for military intervention and for colonization, purporting to facilitate the westernization of indigenous peoples, especially in the period from the 15th to the 20th centuries. And so, as you can see from this Wikipedia page, all of these different countries that were colonized with this idea in mind, and it all just reminds me of residential schools, which were like racist Christian retraining boarding schools for Native Americans and, of course, indigenous people of other countries, as there were residential schools in Australia, Canada, and the US. And at these schools, first of all, they would remove children from their homes, and sometimes they would adopt them out, but they would go to these boarding schools where they'd have their hair cut. They were forced to convert to Christianity. They were not allowed to speak their native language, and they were brutally punished and abused. If you want to really be upset, look up what has happened, especially in Canadian residential schools, because they have recently found mass graves, and this is generally a huge, huge problem, and the last residential school didn't close until the 90s. So I just wanted to point this out because this was done under the guise of religion, and since they believed that they were uncivilized and they were less than human, They didn't feel bad at all about doing this sort of thing. And while the majority of these residential schools operated in a Catholic context, there was still some Protestant shenanigans happening when it came to the civilizing mission. And in the US context, the civilizing mission took on a decidedly evangelical tone. The French version posited Catholicism as a civilizing influence, but Americans overwhelmingly jettisoned the Catholic part of this, a religion they quite frequently identified as intrinsically tyrannical and anti-democratic, and replaced it with Protestantism. Missionaries frequently served as the first front of American colonial projects. There was already a long history of American Protestants working to convert Native Americans to Christianity before the French gave new language to the civilizing mission. But as Euro-American thinkers began theorizing culture with new idioms, much of that discourse made its way into missiology. This often generated partnerships between missionaries and American institutions of government. For example, in the early 19th century, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions explicitly prioritized civilizing Native Americans, teaching them English, and converting them to Christianity. Federal authorities recognized this as a potential strategy for subduing Native Americans and therefore supported the ABCFM's efforts to build plantations and schools in the Mississippi Valley. Missionaries believed that by teaching them English and Euro-American models for manual labor, they could begin the long process of civilization. For our purposes here today, we are going to move forward just a little bit in time and kind of enter what I would consider the modern missionary era. The model of an earlier era more typically involved Christian groups in Western countries sending people to evangelize in Africa or Asia. In the colonial era of the 19th and early 20th centuries in particular, missionaries from numerous countries in Europe, for example, traveled to countries like Congo and India and started to build religious infrastructures of churches, schools, and hospitals. And while many presented their work in humanitarian terms of educating local populations or assisting with disaster relief, in practice it often meant leading people away from their indigenous spiritual practices and facilitating colonial regimes in their takeover of land. Kenya's first post-colonial president, Jomo Kenyatta, described in the activities of British missionaries in his country this way: "When the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible." Yet as many states achieved independence from colonial powers following World War II, the numbers of Christian missionaries kept increasing. In 1970, according to the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, there were over 240,000 foreign Christian missionaries worldwide. In 2000, that number had grown to 440,000, and by 2013, the center was discussing in a report the trend of reverse mission, where younger churches in the global south are sending missionaries to Europe. Even as the numbers being sent from the global north were declining significantly, the report noted that nearly half of the top 20 mission-sending countries in 2010 were in the global south, including Brazil, India, the Philippines, and Mexico. And all of this reminds me of the 1040 window, which is the rectangular area of North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, approximately between 10 degrees north and 40 degrees north latitude. I didn't know that's what the numbers stood for. The 1040 window is often called the resistance belt and includes the majority of the world's Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. What can you tell me about the 1040 window?
So I was taught the 1040 window in my missions classes. It's the most unreached part of the world. It's where Satan has a stronghold. It's actually the part of the world that Jesus lived in, but it's considered to be the most unreached. And going to the 1040 window is very difficult because most of the countries within it, there can be some restrictions to missionaries getting in. Yeah, it's just a very different and like risky place for Christians to go into. So if you're going into the 1040 window, you're like a real strong.
I feel like do people that go there have like a reputation for being really tough?
Absolutely. And there is like a little bit of supremacy depending on like where you're going to be a missionary as well. So like people who are going to like New Zealand, like there are people who want to do missions in New Zealand. They're considered to be like wimps compared to the people who want to go to India or
Wow.
China. Yeah. I knew a lot of missionaries in Italy as well. And there was definitely, nobody would say it, but there was definitely like this, they aren't really doing anything type of
Wow.
thing. But yeah,
That's
the
awesome.
1040 window is where most of the unreached people of the world live. And it's just difficult for Christians to get there. There are some Christians that genuinely do believe that like Satan is there and alive, and Jesus won't come back until that part of the world has been
Mhm.
evangelized to. There's also, I didn't believe that as a Christian, but there are people who are just like, we have to get to the 1040 window before Jesus will ever come back.
Does that have anything to do with the Great Commission?
Yeah, so the 1040 window, yeah, so that's like the mission statement logo, whatever, for missions. It's like you want to fulfill the Great Commission, and as Christians, you're commanded to. It also goes as far as to say, like, they need to be believing in the right type of Christianity. Like, that's what it's been warped into. So it's like, I know missionaries in South America, and they don't need to be there because it's like everyone there is Catholic. Everyone there believes in Jesus, but for them to fulfill the Great Commission, they are going to these places that they don't need to be because they need to believe in the right type of evangelical Jesus.
I've heard fundies and other religious people refer to this place as Satan's stronghold because you can put two and two together. This whole concept is racist and rooted in colonialism, and I don't like it, and they need to leave these people alone. Clearly, they already have a religion, and it's not like everybody on earth hasn't heard of Jesus. Like, we all know who he is. He's the most recognizable figure in human history. Also, here's a throwback from my IHOP episode where they're doing some singing at the 24/7 prayer room, and they shout out the 1040 window.
Lord, even as we're in the season of Ramadan, Lord, I'm asking that you would reveal your son to those in the Islamic world. Lord, I'm asking that you would pour out your spirit all across the Middle East, all across the 1040 window.
You know, as well as some good old-fashioned Islamophobia. Also, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about IHOP, but like a toxic ex, I just can't quit. I've played this trailer on my channel many times. It's because I highly recommend this documentary. It's called God Loves Uganda, and it is about IHOP missionaries and more specifically Lou Engle, who works closely with IHOP all the time, and it's about their influence on Ugandan politics because they were instrumental in the anti-homosexuality law. So, the spirit of colonialism is alive and well at the Pancake Church.
I believe the Lord is calling me to pray for a great missionary force. America's not yet done sending her sons and daughters to bring the gospel to the nations.
Most of these young people, it's a time to have an adventure. But the poor African listening to them think that's how things should be.
The Bible say, okay, all sex outside of marriage is wrong. So adultery is wrong, fornication is wrong, acts of homosexuality are wrong.
Homosexuality does not benefit the society.
It's sin.
Are you ready for Jesus?
We do not fight sodomy because of who they are, but what they do.
Yeah, a lot of these countries don't allow missionaries, but they still get in because they lie. When I'm abroad, I don't use the word missionary because of the stigma that it carries with other communities. I just use volunteer or English teacher so it actually sounds like I'm there with a purpose, and I'm not going to make you believe something you don't want to believe. She considers it her job to model a life with purpose, which she hopes can lead people to embrace Christianity without it having to be forced down their throat. Beyond faith, Christian missionaries' motivations can vary widely, in part because they come from diverse denominations. Mormons, Pentecostals, Evangelicals, Baptists, and Catholics all do mission work. The work is particularly central to Mormonism, which encourages observation of the scriptural invocation to preach the gospel to every creature. Pentecostals and Evangelicals are also among the more visible. By the way, of comparison, at the beginning of this year, 67,000 Mormons from around the world were serving as missionaries, while the U.S.-based Southern Baptist Convention reported having sent only about 3,500 missionaries overseas. They may be driven by their faith, the wish to do good in the world, and an interest in serving a higher purpose. But their motivations, according to young Christian missionaries I've spoken to, also include everything from the desire to travel abroad to the desire for social capital. Often, these are mutually reinforcing. Faith, of course, remains a primary driver. Many feel that they've been called, that they've received a transcendent summons, says Lynette Bicos, a psychologist who has researched children in international missionary families. For some, the sense of a calling might lead to joining the Peace Corps or a nonprofit, but what distinguishes missionaries is this sense of transcendent missions. They're doing it for religious purposes, to dig wells, but to do it in a Christian context. Other examples of white saviorism would be the documentary Savior Complex, which is a docuseries about Renee Bach, who went as a missionary to Uganda, and she did not have proper medical training. She was not a doctor, but she was doing procedures on everybody, including a lot of kids, and many of them died. And it's just horrific because they were looking to her to help them, and she literally killed them. She didn't do it on purpose, but it was a lot of negligence, and it was a lot of like overconfidence that she thought that she might as well be a doctor. She shouldn't have been giving IVs to people all the time. Another horror story out of the modern missionary movement would be John Chow. He tried to convert the Sentinelese people. They are super isolated and they don't have contact with the outside world, and anybody who tries to mess with them ends up dead. It's extremely dangerous for the Sentinelese people because they have never been exposed to our germs. So it's really just so messed up that he was trying to convert them and put the entire tribe at risk because of his religious fervor. And so he, despite being told by the government, by many people, by the entire world to not go and mess with them, he did. And they killed him, and it was not even possible to retrieve his body because you can't get close to them. He literally was writing in his diary that he thought he was going to die, but he has to give them the word of God. He has to preach to them. And just that kind of audacity is just, wow. You really felt strongly about that. But he was willing to die for it, I guess. But I think the moral of the story is do not try and convert people who don't want it, and they do not fucking want it.
An American missionary who loved the outdoors, John Allen Chow often documented his adventures on Instagram. But these photos would be his last. Authorities say the 26-year-old was killed, possibly by bow and arrow, on what police described as a misplaced adventure in a highly restricted area to a remote island east of India in the Andaman Sea. He was trying to meet and convert the Sentinelese, an endangered tribe photographed here in 2004 that's been isolated for centuries and rejects contact with outsiders who might expose them to disease. According to journals and emails published by the Washington Post, Chow attempted to reach the tribe by boat in the days before his death, but was shot at with an arrow, which pierced his waterproof Bible. He wrote to family, "You guys might think I'm crazy and all this, but I think it's worthwhile to declare Jesus to these people. God, I don't want to die." In a statement shared on his Instagram account, Chow's family wrote, "Words cannot express the sadness we have experienced about this report. He had nothing but love for the Sentinelese people. We forgive those reportedly responsible for his death."
This was a dangerous trip both for the missionary and the tribe.
It was incredibly dangerous for him and foolhardy thing to have done, but even more dangerous for the Sentinelese themselves. They are the most isolated tribe on earth.
And with going to a foreign country, and especially if you're working with one of these inexperienced fly-by-night youth organizations, they just can't protect you from bad things. They don't have your safety in mind because a lot of them don't even know what they're doing. There are a lot of missionaries who get abducted or killed. And while that is very upsetting and very sad, you have to remember they can't help you a lot of times. And so how scary is that? Like, yeah, it's just something that they have to think about. Yes, some of them do help out the communities that are already there, but a lot of times people, like, especially when it's short-term missions, they just don't, like, they're there for such a short amount of time. They really can't get a good start, and a lot of times they just end up standing around or doing skits. You had missionary doctors parachuting in here doing amputations rather than setting or treating wounds because they knew their charter jet was leaving in 2 days and they would not be able to oversee follow-up, said Dr. Scott Nelson, an American orthopedic surgeon and Adventist missionary, as he lifted a moaning man onto a soiled stretcher. "The community trusts us, but when other groups make short-sighted decisions, it undermines everyone's credibility," he added. Dr. Nelson and other veteran missionaries faulted the new arrivals for frequently acting on their own instead of collaborating with more established missionary groups that plan on staying in Haiti for the long haul. It is tension, some experts say, that can arise from the differing reasons that missions have for being here. The new or short-term groups see themselves as being there to save souls first and lives second, said Jonathan J. Bonk, director of the Overseas Ministry Study Center in New Haven. The older, less conservative missions often see it the other way around. Also, when I said there are missionaries in other religions, I was being completely serious. Here's what happens with Scientology missionaries. Some of them arrived on John Travolta's Boeing 707, which he flew down loaded with tons of relief supplies. And when not doing relief work, they sang classic rock songs at a crowded bar full of aid workers inside the United Nations compound. At the General Hospital in Port-au-Prince, where Scientologists in bright yellow t-shirts have assisted as volunteers, some have carried out what they call touch therapy, in which they say they realign patients' nervous systems by touching them through their clothes. So this Scientology missionary shit is no joke. So not only did they go down to Haiti, and by the way, this is in 2010, but they allegedly commandeered a Coast Guard boat, which by the way reminds me of Metacore. Never forget. They also commandeered something, Navy jet fuel, which they couldn't even use, by the way. And, they had Chick-fil-A flown in. Anyway, so back to these Scientologists. Apparently they were super unorganized, and they really were out here rubbing people the wrong way, and I mean that literally. They had no one who spoke Creole, and they brought the weirdness of touch healing, remember that's when they rub people through their clothes, into a very superstitious society. They'd leave the tent and come into the General Hospital downtown and try healing people. One of the doctors and one of the nurses told me that the wounded started coming to them to tell them they didn't want to be treated by the people in the yellow shirts. Alright, I thought I would end this segment on a really just batshit quote. So this article is about this book, When Helping Hurts, How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself, by Steve Corbett and Brian Fickert, and the article's by Megan Fowler. I thought this was going to go in a completely different direction because it's talking about the harm of short-term missions, but then it gets to this part. One of the biggest mistakes North American churches make, by far, is applying relief in situations in which rehabilitation or development is the appropriate intervention, Fickert and Corbett wrote. I told them since we all desire to change lives together, what would it look like if we did more relational work and not relief work, Potter said. Because at the root of poverty are broken relationships. Poverty is the result of relationships that do not work, that are not just, that are not for life, that are not harmonious or enjoyable, wrote Corbett and Fickert, quoting Fuller Seminary professor of transformational development Bryant Myers. Poverty is the absence of shalom in all its meaning. Westerners often view poverty as lacking material needs and ignore the underlying issues, they wrote. Instead, poverty is a sin-induced strain in a person's four key relationships with God, creation, others, and self. While everyone experiences some relational poverty, for certain individuals, the effects of devastating relational poverty lead to material poverty. Attempting to alleviate material poverty without addressing the underlying relational strain will not only fail, but will also tempt resourced Christians to view the materially poor as lazy, Fickert and Corbett wrote. Wow, they really will do anything except criticize capitalism, huh? This was horribly condescending, slightly racist, and completely just inaccurate to what poverty is or how people who are in exploited countries, how they have to navigate the world. It just completely glosses over that and puts it all on, well, if they were better Christians, they wouldn't be so broke. I'm sick of this shit. Let's talk about something else. Now I want to talk about the International Mission Board, affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Southern Baptist Convention, formed in 1845 as the Church of Southern Slaveholders. The Southern Baptist Convention, of course, is the biggest Protestant denomination in the United States, accounting for 5.3% of the entire U.S. adult population. America's second largest Protestant group, if you're wondering, is the mainline United Methodist Church, accounting for 3.6% of U.S. adults, with Southern Baptists making up about a fifth of all U.S. evangelical Protestants, which is 21%. And remember, the Southern Baptist Convention is not a centralized church, but a fellowship of congregations. They vote on what the denomination is going to believe and practice every year. June 11th and 12th, they have a convention. At the most recent convention, they almost voted to expel any churches that had female pastors of any kind. They didn't, though. But they did have time to vote on banning IVF for Southern Baptists. So, they're very busy.
The resolution, which received about 60% of the delegate votes, supporting a decision in February by Alabama's Supreme Court, which ruled embryos are considered children.
This resolution affirms that, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Unequivocally.
It also calls for members to advocate for the government to restrain actions inconsistent with the dignity and value of every human being, which necessarily includes frozen embryonic human beings.
It's not just a statement of sort of moral principle. It's calling on members of these faith communities to lobby the government to restrict IVF.
Still, the decision was not unanimous. Some delegates shared stories of lives enriched by IVF, including Daniel Taylor, who spoke on behalf of his godson's parents who conceived using IVF.
I cannot believe we are privileged to have him in our lives. Because of him, I thank God for IVF.
Why are you disappointed by this resolution passing?
I think that some of the language is a little harsher than I would like. Some of the language implies that there is no use for IVF that is ethical. And whereas I know of circumstances, because my godson was conceived in this circumstance, where IVF was used in a very ethical way that is consistent with pro-life and Christian ethics.
This push against IVF, of course, is happening in an election year where reproductive rights are expected to be a top issue at the ballot box. Poll shows Americans overwhelmingly believe access to IVF is a good thing. Later today, Senate Democrats are expected to force a vote to enshrine IVF protections, but a majority of Republicans are expected to block the legislation, calling it politically motivated.
Heads up, we're going to be talking about sexual abuse because it's the SBC. Of course we are. So pay attention to the timestamps on the screen and skip over this part if you don't want to hear it. They still completely bungled the handling of all the sexual abuse that was happening within the SBC.
We have new revelations now about the Southern Baptist Convention. An investigative report revealed that the top leaders in that church group mishandled sexual abuse allegations for years. Will Reeve has the latest. Good morning, Will.
Good morning, George. The Southern Baptist Convention has 13 million members, and this just released report will have a major impact on the church. Leaders from the nation's largest Protestant denomination have released a large-scale third-party investigation that found a culture that permeated the group in which top clergy ignored, minimized, and even vilified sex abuse survivors. The nearly 300-page report also reveals church leaders resisted efforts for abuse prevention and reform for decades, and goes on to show evidence that suggests leaders lied to members of the church regarding keeping a potential database of offenders to prevent abuse, all the while keeping their own secret list. The SBC, like other major religious institutions in the U.S., has struggled with declining membership over the last decade and a half. Church leaders have bristled at comparisons to the abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, claiming that the total number of abuse cases is smaller within the Southern Baptist Convention.
That's why I'm bringing it up now, is because we're going to talk about the IMB, the International Mission Board, because several of the missionaries were sexual abusers. The same old shit you see everywhere, especially within the IFB, making victims apologize to the abuser, making them forgive them, and generally sweeping under the rug. And when you sweep things under the rug and you cover them up, then that allows for more abuse, because then those abusers can continue working with vulnerable populations. It also creates a toxic environment to the point where people are afraid to speak up, or if they speak up, they get in trouble, or they're told, you're going against the mission, because you wouldn't want to get so-and-so in trouble. Now, would you? You wouldn't want to get the church in trouble. You don't want to stop these people from becoming Christians, do you? Well, that's going to happen if you speak up. Just pretty horrible stuff. This, of course, was happening in the IMB too, and there were several high-profile cases where missionaries were abusing the people that they worked with, children, sometimes their own children. It is fucked up. If they're willing to do that to the people they know and the people that could potentially get them in trouble, what do you think they're doing to the actual vulnerable populations of these places that they go to? Who are they supposed to report to when a person who is supposed to be helping them is actually harming them? They don't really have a lot of options. And that's not to say that anybody has it better or worse. I'm just saying, like, there probably is a lot more of these situations happening and we just aren't aware of it because of, like a language barrier or a cultural difference. People were reporting this abuse, and they were reporting it to the people that they thought they should. The higher ups in the mission board, their supervisors, their family, church members, and nothing was done. They would be told sometimes, oh, we'll take care of it, but then they don't do anything about it. There's no investigations, there's no police reports, nobody gets in trouble, and it gets put on the survivors to just deal with it, just move on with life. And meanwhile, these abusers get to start over constantly. Every time they do something bad, they get sent to another church, another mission area, and they abuse, and then the cycle just repeats. The IMB has been sued before by families for not protecting them and not doing anything about this sexual abuse. Diana Wade filed a lawsuit alleging the mission board had broken contractual promises to protect her family and increased harm to her children by concealing her husband's criminal behavior. A jury decision favored the family, but the Wades lost in 1991. After the board appealed to the Virginia Supreme Court, mission board leaders were forced to address the allegations publicly only because of the lawsuit. Board officials never said whether they investigated if other children were abused by Wade, a missionary in Kenya and Botswana from 1976 to 1984. In all 5 cases investigated by reporters, it was unclear if missionaries who had been accused of or admitted to abusing missionary children were investigated to see if they abused local children. The missionary board was forced again to address the abuse going on in 2002, 3 decades after William McElrath, a longtime Indonesia missionary, first privately told employees that he had abused colleagues' children, and this was in letters that he wrote. By the time Devarth reported McElrath in 1977, mission board leaders already had heard similar accusations, letters, and other records show. In 1973, he admitted to abusing another child, and a note was placed in his file, but mission leaders let him continue to serve. In 1978, another incident caused the organization to restrict McElrath's interactions with children. I say don't let him interact with anybody. Lock him in the basement and don't let him out. Still, he remained in the field, board records and correspondence provided by victims show. Finally, in 1995, Davarth and several others wrote Jerry Rankin, mission board president from 1993 to 2010, complaining about McElrath. That same year, the board fired McElrath for immoral lifestyle unbecoming to a missionary. He then sent 6 letters to members of 6 missionary families he described as impacted by his actions, both parents and children. Please forgive me for having touched you too intimately when you were a child many years ago. I'm gonna fucking lose my mind. I'm so glad this guy is dead. Missions director at the time, Jerry Rankin, who also served as a former missionary with McElrath, said he had heard ugly rumors, but as board president, he advocated for keeping the incident within a small circle. I see no constructive purpose by making a general accounting of this matter to all our missionaries and to Southern Baptists in general, he wrote. After leaving Indonesia, McElrath and his wife moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and joined a Southern Baptist church in North Carolina. He regularly worked with children, taught piano lessons, and helped raise his blind niece. When survivors learned in 2002 that he was still involved with children, they began contacting the mission board. The agenda of a June 2002 meeting notes that they wanted to publicly share their stories, create an independent advisory committee, notify law enforcement, and monitor all perpetrators after termination. The IMB subsequently issued an unusual news release. Even though wrong behavior took place nearly 30 years ago, the scars and repercussions are very real and painful. We are firmly committed to reaching out to victims and dealing decisively with violators. Yeah, sure you do. 5 years after the IMB promised survivors it would publicly expose any missionary found guilty of such abuse, the board quietly investigated another missionary, Adderholt, for sexual abuse. Internal investigators concluded that he had more likely than not had an inappropriate sexual relationship with an underage girl. By then, Adderholt, who went to Hungary in 2000 as a missionary, had become the IMB's regional strategy associate in Central Europe. According to his own resume, he had visited 29 countries. Adderholt resigned before the board could meet about about whether to fire him, documents show, he listed 2 top IMB personnel as references and became associate director and chief strategist of the Southern Carolina Baptist Convention. The board released information about the reason for his resignation only after Miller publicized the allegations and went to police in 2018. Adderholt's attorney did not respond to requests for comment. Adderholt subsequently was charged in Tarrant County with sexual assault of a child under 17 and with 2 accounts of indecency with a child by contact. The case is still pending. Yeah, he ended up pleading guilty and he didn't get very much time, but he did formally get charged, and a former and current IMB president also reached out to apologize for what had happened, but I mean, too little too late. And especially since the SBC was covering all this shit up knowingly, and they had their own database from which they would use that information internally, but they wouldn't share it. Imagine what else they know. Imagine what else they're covering up. The SBC does now have a mandated reporting system, and by that I mean they just did that like in the last 2 years. And they also have a very strange policy for people looking to do background checks on their missionaries. Whenever a church, SBC entity, or other ministry sees IMB on the resume of someone looking to serve with them, we urge them to contact us. IMB's practice is to terminate individuals who have engaged in sexual abuse or other forms of misconduct. However, in some cases, an individual has resigned before IMB can terminate the individual, or the IMB does not find out about the misconduct until after the individual has left service with IMB. Therefore, IMB strongly encourages any church, entity, or other employer who is considering working or partnering with a former IMB personnel to contact IMB to obtain a reference on that individual. Reference requests can be submitted to IMB's HR department at blah, blah, blah. IMB quickly responds to all reference requests by providing a release for that former personnel to sign, authorizing IMB to share information from its HR file. In most cases, IMB will have positive information to share. However, in the rarer cases where IMB has information to share concerning child abuse or sexual misconduct by that former personnel, or the former personnel refuses to sign the release, then the church, entity, or employer will be in a better position to evaluate future relationship with that former IMB personnel. The person has to ask you for the reference, and then you'll ask the IMB person if they're allowed to share your information, and then maybe if they say it's okay, they'll let the person know that they were an abuser, if they sign the release. Even just taking a cursory glance at this, one can see it's based entirely on protecting the IMB as an organization. Indeed, it's almost comical how aggressively they cast aside concerns of protecting the innocent or acting with ethics in favor of just jumping straight into lawsuit avoidance. An organization that wants to truly address abuse in the church does not focus on getting itself out of trouble. It puts the welfare of abuse victims and survivors at the forefront of the mission. IMB honestly proving beyond a shadow of a doubt how little it cares about the damage it causes. So remember when I was talking about aid organizations or missionary organizations that discriminate against their employees and volunteers? Well, I was talking about Samaritan's Purse. Samaritan's Purse, you might know them from Operation Christmas Child. I remember hearing about them first through Allie Beth Stuckey because I didn't grow up with this program, which is like a toy drive, I guess. You buy the specific shoebox size, or you can get a plastic shoebox from them. Then you print your labels, you fill it with gifts. Literally, I don't know if they go through these items to make sure that you're not just sending broken crap or poison. You're allowed to pack it with whatever you want, and then you're supposed to pray and then also donate $10 for shipping. And then they will deliver them to children overseas because, you know, that's what they want, is your child's dirty squishmallow and used toothbrush. So isn't that great? Samaritan's Purse is huge. They have a lot of money. They have boats and planes and everything they could possibly need. This was actually founded in 1970 by Baptist pastor Robert Pierce, who also founded World Vision International in Boone, North Carolina. In 1973, Pierce met Franklin Graham, who is the son of Billy Graham. Also, I just want to point out this other guy's name. You're telling me his name is Dick for men? They met in 1973, and they made several trips together to visit relief projects and missionary partners of Asia and elsewhere. Graham became president of Samaritan's Purse in 1979, following Pierce's death in 1978. By 2022, Samaritan's Purse had offices in the United States, Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Japan, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. The organization provides assistance in more than 100 countries. Now, I don't know enough about what they do for aid. When it comes to the actual help that they give people, I am not sure. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you've ever been helped by one of these organizations. Franklin Graham is not a wholesome individual.
Because marriage is the institution that God has given. And for us now to give this to same-sex couples, and who's to say that a few years from now that a man cannot marry his daughter, or two men can marry one woman? I mean, where do you draw the line?
He is homophobic.
Do I wish ill to gay couples? No, I don't. But I want them to know the truth, that they are living a sinful life and a sinful relationship, and God is going to judge sin one day. And the Bible says that sinners will be separated from him in a place the Bible calls hell.
He is transphobic.
And we got a woman, and her goal is the gay lesbian agenda.
Oh my God, new lesbian socialist republic lore just dropped.
Trying to get transgenders into the bathrooms.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Get more transgender people into the bathrooms. We're gonna have a party in there.
So that if a person wakes up in the morning and they feel like they're a woman, that's a man, and he wants to go into a ladies' restroom, then they can do that. And that's her goal. And I can tell you right now, that's wicked and that's evil.
He hates Muslims.
And we're allowing Muslims to come into this country, to immigrate, and I think we should halt all immigration temporarily from countries that have active terrorist cells operating in those countries. We should not be allowing immigration into this country.
And he's just an all-around bad guy.
Gays and lesbians cannot have children. Biologically, it's impossible.
Right. They can adopt, but...
Yeah, they can recruit.
Recruit?
Yeah, sure.
What's the difference between recruit and adopt, do you think?
Well, I think you can adopt a child into a marriage, but you can also recruit children into your cause. And so I believe in protecting children, okay, from exploitation, all exploitations. Mm-hmm. So that's all that is about. I think I agreed with Putin. I think protecting his nation's children, I think, was probably a pretty smart thing to do. I was very clear I supported Putin in his decision to protect his nation's children, and I think our Congress needs to do more in protecting our nation's children.
And something that is very controversial about Samaritan's Purse, this organization has been criticized for requiring volunteers to sign a controversial statement of faith which disavows homosexuality and same-sex marriage. So I went looking for this statement of faith that employees allegedly have to sign, and I don't know if this thing that I'm looking at is what they have to sign, but this is Samaritan's Purse's statement of faith on their website. It's all very normal Christian stuff, and then, of course, you get to God's plan for human sexuality is to be expressed only within the context of marriage, and that God created man and woman as unique biological persons made for each other, monogamous marriage, exclusively one genetic male and one genetic female. Yeah, they've really been laying into that one recently. We believe that human life is sacred from conception to natural end, and then God wonderfully and immutably creates each person, biological male or female. The two distinct but complementary sexes reflect the image and likeness of God. Rejection of one's biological sex is a rejection of God's merciful design and creative order. So, yeah. That's what they're doing. During COVID, Samaritan's Purse ran into even more controversy because they were working with another hospital to do an overflow hospital tent outside. I believe they were helping people in a medical capacity. I'm not sure on the specifics of that.
My name's Elliot Tenpenny. Behind me you'll see Central Park. Here we're setting up an emergency field hospital in New York City. We need your help as medical professionals to help Samaritan's Purse respond to this city's need in response to this coronavirus outbreak.
People did not like them being there because of their politics, because Franklin Graham is such a piece of crap, because they require their employees to sign this awful statement of faith. And so there was backlash.
When it opened in March, the field hospital set up at Central Park was meant to increase hospital beds during the coronavirus crisis. More than 300 patients were treated at the temporary facility. Now, some are happy to see it go.
Samaritan's Purse will be gone from New York within 2 weeks. We are very relieved and consider this to be a victory for the LGBT community as well as other oppressed groups.
LGBTQ advocates rallied on Sunday against the organization that helped set up the facility. The tent hospital is a collaborative effort between Mount Sinai Hospital and Samaritan's Purse, an organization founded by preacher Franklin Graham. The religious figure has expressed anti-gay and anti-Muslim views. Critics also accuse the group of exploiting patients, which were filmed at the facility. The footage later used in fundraising videos. On Sunday, the Reclaim Pride Coalition organized the rally outside of the hospital's Beth Israel location, which was also getting assistance from Samaritan's Purse.
We want New Yorkers to know that they have been sold down the river by their officials and leaders who have not cared about them in bringing bigotry into the city.
Despite multiple requests from police, the group decided to continue with their press conference and rally outside of Mount Sinai Hospital. Officers did issue some citations to people present because they were in violation of the state and city ban on organized events and large gatherings during the coronavirus crisis.
They are trying to shut down this message to New York City that the mayor, the governor, and Mount Sinai Hospital have brought a huge, dangerous bigot into our midst.
Mayor de Blasio previously said he would be monitoring the group's operations, but perhaps the sharpest criticism from a city leader coming from Council Speaker Corey Johnson, who tweeted, quote, "It is time for Samaritan's Purse to leave New York City. This group, which is led by the notoriously bigoted, hate-spewing Franklin Graham, came at a time when our city couldn't, in good conscience, turn away any offer of help. That time has passed." While it's not clear if the backlash caused the closure, Samaritan's Purse and Mount Sinai issued a joint statement saying they will stop admitting new patients to the tent hospital in Central Park, and that the organization would also wind down its support of Mount Sinai Beth Israel Hospital over the next 2 weeks. Amy Yensi, New York One.
Okay, I find that super interesting that the LGBTQ group got in trouble for having a rally during COVID. Like, I didn't expect that twist to the story. Franklin and the hospital released a statement saying that they don't discriminate against patients. Well, Franklin Graham said that they do discriminate against employees. He said it right here on his Facebook. In fact, Franklin Graham said that it was the gay people that were harassing him because he needs to exercise his right to discriminate. I mean, this is the kind of shit I was talking about, where sometimes the only help that people can get is from a religious source because we don't have a social safety net, because we have such horrible health care here in America. We have to put up with assholes like Franklin Graham. Kind of what he said, I mean, he didn't cuss, but he said, how dare these people complain about the help we're giving them? He basically called them ungrateful. And it's like, well, you shouldn't be the way that you are. But hey, everybody, Editing Jen here, just checking in. How are we feeling? How are we doing? Do you guys need a snack, bathroom break? If so, pause the video because this is not interactive. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because this video is so long and because I am running out of time to edit it, I did have to cut several organizations, including Child Evangelism Fellowship, Teen Missions International, and Adventures in Missions. And I wanted to let you know that just because I cut them does not mean that they aren't important or that the survivor stories I read are not valid. Some of my fans have even reached out and told me about their time or their experience with some of these organizations. And I just wanted to say, I love you, but I had to cut it for time. Some of the stuff I read about these organizations was absolutely nuts, including people who were subjected to Teen Missions International and that crazy boot camp and obstacle course you have to go through. And they get punishments called special blessings. And like they basically get publicly shamed and they have to do extra labor because they were bad. And then, of course, Adventures in Missions with the world race where they try to take you to 12 countries in 12 months. And that all got fucked up because of COVID. And I've heard the same kind of abusive stuff there that I have all these other ones. Biblical gaslighting, toxic culture, spiritual abuse. If you were involved in any of these organizations, your stories, your feelings are valid. I just have to cut it for time. So I hope that was a good enough explanation of those groups. So now we're going to talk about Cru, which formerly stood for Campus Crusade for Christ, but they changed the name in 2012 because they didn't want their organization to be affiliated with the Crusade. That's one of the many reasons why a lot of conservative Christians consider Cru to be woke. Now, we're going to get into that, but I wouldn't be getting excited. They're not woke. Maybe many of you have heard of Cru because they do usually start their branches on college campuses, which is far more acceptable to me than, good news clubs at public elementary schools, because these are consenting adults that do this. But anyway, they're heavily affiliated with universities because, they want to get the young people to, use their gap year to go on a mission trip and, give them money. So anyway, so Campus Crusade for Christ was formed in 1951 at UCLA by Bill Bright. Bill Bright is a fairly influential Christian, especially around that time period. Cru is huge with over 19,000 employees in over 190 countries, countless offshoot ministries. They even run a few Bible colleges, but they are probably most known in America for their college groups, but also mission work. And the current president is David Robbins. In 1979, Bill Bright produced the movie Jesus. Is anybody else really digging this music? God, how many frames per second is this? Less than one? But somebody's grandma was spending all day long trying to download this clip using her dial-up modem. It's also called the Jesus Film, and there is the Jesus Film Project, which is they call themselves a ministry, but a project to translate this movie into every language. But they won't give credit to the people that were in the movie. When the movie was produced, they didn't put out production or cast credits, as producer John Heyman declared that the creators of this picture were simply being translators of the New Testament's Gospel of Luke, so nobody will know who produced or directed the film. What?
Is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?
He also co-founded the Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative Christian legal group with a history of attempting to block rights and protections for LGBTQ people. John Rogers is also an ADF board member. According to ADF's website, Rogers joined the organization with the intent of forging a stronger relationship between Cru and the ADF. Cru's mission statement is to win, build, and send Christ-centered multiplying disciples through its well-known campus. Is to win, build, and send Christ-centered multiplying disciples. That is not a properly... that's not how sentences work. I think I'm just going to call it Cru, though, because it really is like a tongue twister to say Campus Crusade for Christ. They were actually behind Explo 72, which is something that I've talked about in Vacation Bible School of Rock. And it, for lack of a better word, was Woodstock for Christians. It was a music festival. Billy Graham was there, and a lot of really famous acts were there, including Johnny Cash. The man that would gamble on luck, look you in the eye and never back up. For more info on like the musicians that played at that festival, as well as kind of the cultural impact, highly recommend VBSR. I think it's in #1. They have a bunch of little offshoot programs, I guess ministries would be a better term for that, like Athletes in Action, Crew Arts and Culture, high school and military branch. Actually, when I talked to Erin, we had a conversation about baptisms while actively serving in the military, and it was quite interesting. Okay, I know that missionaries will, if they have a body of water, they will baptize people sometimes, but like that would seem like that would be a problem. Like if you're Church of Christ, because you don't have a thing, and like
Yeah, so I've heard stories within the Church of Christ about people in the military. They're in the middle of the desert and there's not like a body of water, but they want to get baptized. They'll like do sand, full immersion, like
okay,
sand. So there's
dust we
different.
shall
I think
return.
that
The chinchilla method.
I mean, there's some Church of Christ. There's some that like wouldn't consider that to be actual baptism, but and also like there are people who want to give their life to Christ on their deathbed, you know, and they can't be dunked in water, and some still do get dunked in water, like even though they could lose their life doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's not really a solution or like a good way to go about it if there is no water, because even if you get baptized in sand, there are Christians who are not going to consider you to be a Christian.
I've been seeing these, you probably have heard of these to-go communion like shots with a little
I forgot.
and I feel like those definitely
I
are
used to
not
have some of
one.
those in my car.
Just in case
Just
of
in
emergency.
case.
Yeah,
Just in
yeah.
case.
If I was like traveling on a Sunday.
They also have the Christian Embassy in Washington. Here is one of their promotional videos to try and, you know, get the young people involved.
Allow me to introduce you to Crew. Since 1951, we have been helping people grow in their faith, building up people everywhere, committed to changing their campuses, changing their workplaces, and changing their families. Our mission takes us all over the world, but our focus is on one person. You. We believe everyone is on a spiritual journey. We want to join you on yours. So, let's journey together.
Going along with these extracurricular activities like Athletes in Action, Crew operates at college campuses. And yes, they do have a missionary program, but they also do normal stuff. They have fellowship, they do Bible study, they play pickleball. Maybe I would call it a Christian outreach or a club or, you know, a small group, you could say.
In college, drinking and partying is so prevalent that a lot of my friends who know that I'm a Christian will outright ask my views on it, like my friend Kelsey.
What did Kelsey do?
When Kelsey asked me if I drank, all I said was no, because it distracts me from honoring God and from being a better version of myself. That's all I said. I didn't share the gospel or my testimony, but it was enough to get her thinking. And then about a week ago, she actually started a conversation with me with, do you mind if I ask you a personal question about your beliefs? And so it just shows that the things I had said to her before got her thinking, and then eventually opened her up to talk more about her relationship with Christ.
I wonder whatever happened to these people. Or her friend Kelsey. I wonder if they're Gennonites now. I was doing my research and trying to find out what people's experiences were with Crew. Of course, I found a bunch of Reddit threads, generally talking about the same stuff we've been going over today. Constant fundraising, toxic culture, spiritual abuse, and just a lack of competent leadership. Lots of tales of people being slut-shamed, people, you know, just the general evangelical stuff. I also wanted to draw attention to this website, uncovercrew.com. This website was very helpful with my research. They compiled a bunch of testimonies from people who went to Crew, and they talk a lot about the culture, how toxic it was, but they really shine a light on LGBTQ stuff, which will come up later. First off, Bill Bright literally published a book in 1995 called The Coming Revival, in which he insists that God has cursed those who insist on practicing and promoting homosexuality, and rails against gay activists arrogantly demanding their rights. Crew used to work with Exodus International, which was the largest conversion therapy ex-gay program that was in America. And they probably would still be working with them if Exodus International didn't shut down. They also make their employees fill out these very invasive questionnaires, but they ask, you know, your relationship with Jesus, but also like your sexuality and just really invasive questions that they don't need to know. Many of their ministries have posted anti-LGBTQ rhetoric before, and they certainly do not let gay people have positions of leadership. Queer crew members have also been forcibly outed for accountability. So keep that in mind when Allie Beth says that they're now a part of the gay agenda. I definitely do not think they are. So for context, I kept seeing articles written about like there's a schism at Crew and Christian leaders are going to have to decide where they stand on the LGBTQ problem. So I was confused. I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Because I have also seen on Crew's website that they, believe in marriage between a biological man and a biological woman. They also say that the gender dysphoria is the result of the brokenness that came from the fall. Liberty University, they have this thing called convocation, and it's like a daily meeting, and it's religious in nature, but they have a lot of speakers that come and give speeches. Rosaria Butterfield, who is, according to this article, an ex-lesbian feminist, and she was calling out all of these Christian leaders, and she was mad that Crew had these mandatory meetings about gay stuff called Compassionate and Faithful. Curriculum, according to her, included respecting pronouns and that being gay isn't inherently sinful, which is still not a lot. Like, that bar is still very low.
I have heard all of these lies, and just in the last year, from Christian ministries. And this is where I name names, and I'm an English professor, so I call this citing my sources. Revoice. Preston Sprinkle's Exiles in Babylon conference, sponsored by his heretical Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, and Crew. And I have believed these lies too, and not only as a Christian, and I have repented publicly as a Christian in my book, to you, in articles, and these people can do the same. We don't throw people away, but without repentance, we don't trust them. We trust repentant saints, not just people with flashy ministries. Christians do not encourage sinners to come out as gay or trans in order to be, quote unquote, missional. This is a mission that leads everybody to hell.
Well, that's awful. I wonder how she feels about transgender people.
Well, first of all, transgenderism, it is truly an invention of an evil age.
Honestly, none of this surprises me, and I hate to say it, but I haven't really seen any ex-gay people that appear to be actually happy with their lives, and so I think she's trying to take it out on others. In a recent interview, she talked about how she refuses to write for the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today because they aren't as anti-gay as she is, even though neither of those organizations, I would exactly say, are progressive. So check out this clip where she says something completely and totally untrue.
My lesbian daughter has now decided she's non-binary and is raising my 3-year-old grandson to be a girl and putting him in tucking underwear.
She's really out here making shit up just for the sole purpose of being transphobic. See, I'm not gonna go into details on why a 3-year-old would not even have a need for tucking panties, but then I would be talking about children's genitals, and that would make me a conservative. But she was especially pissed that they had somebody teaching classes named Preston Sprinkle. Preston Sprinkle is the co-founder and president of the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender. And this group educates Christians about different aspects of gender and sexuality. They do take a kind, and I guess you could consider it compassionate, approach to queer Christians.
Hey, when you think of the church, what comes to mind? What are they going to say? What's your gay neighbor going to say when you say, hey, I'm a Christian, and I'm just curious, when you think of the Christian church, what's the first word that comes to mind? What are they going to say? Oh, kindness. When I think of the Christians, kindness. I hope they would say that. Unfortunately, I would say, for the most part, most LGBT friends you meet on the streets who are not part of the church, when they think of the church, the first word out of the mouth is not kindness. And that is a problem. See, over the last 40, 50 plus years, we have built a reputation of not embodying the kindness of God towards LGBT people, but embodying fear.
but none of that shit is affirming, and it still leaves a lot to be desired. I actually watched some of the LGBTQ training seminar, and they are not affirming. They are not this woke gay agenda that everyone thinks they are.
Claire entered a same-sex relationship. She was afraid of how other Christians might respond to her if they knew that she was gay. I did not want to reinforce her fears by jumping into that topic right away. When I approached talking about Crew's stance on same-sex romantic relationships and sexual sin, I do it in the same way I do with any student who is living in sin. I gently explain that an athlete who is not experiencing victory in the area of sexual wholeness is not in a position to lead others spiritually yet.
Honestly, this whole situation is so annoying, and I don't like anybody involved. Except Preston. He's trying at least, but he still has a long way to go. It honestly sounds like these people want to have their communion wafers and eat them too.
Child just came out as gay or lesbian or transgender, and I'm trying to navigate this. My first two questions are, how's your relationship with your child? And do they love Jesus? Everything else is secondary. Those are the two primary things that you need to keep at the center of your relationship. Don't keep harping on gay sexuality or homosexuality. I wouldn't even focus too much on the sexuality question unless your child really wants to talk about it. Focus on, do they love Jesus? Do they cherish Jesus? Are they walking in faithfulness with Jesus? Yes, some gay people may be called to celibacy. I also know a lot of gay people who, and I gotta be careful here, but I know a lot of gay people who enter into a healthy opposite sex marriage. You see, sexuality can be more fluid than people realize. I know several gay people who got married to somebody of the opposite sex. They sort of fell in love with them as sort of like falling in love with your best friend, I guess. And then later on, or through time, through the relationship, romantic and even sexual desires were cultivated through that relationship. And, to their own surprise. And again, I'm not saying this is a guarantee, like, oh, if you just marry somebody of the opposite sex, you'll totally get attracted to them. I am not saying that at all, because I know other relationships of this sort that were really destructive because people weren't honest, they weren't upfront, it just didn't work out. But I think we cannot close the door on what's called mixed orientation marriages. I do think that it's a real possibility. Our sexuality is more unpredictable than people realize. It is possible for a gay person to marry someone of the opposite sex and to have that be a flourishing marriage. Not a guarantee, it's a possibility. You can truly hold on to a traditional view of marriage and truly love and honor and accept LGBT people.
I don't agree with those things, but the fundies are thinking that this is some crazy progressive woke situation. I don't know. What do you guys think? So in 2020, there was this, I'm pretty sure it started as a Facebook post, but there was a letter written to Steve Sellers, who did step down this year, by the way, and Mark Gauthier, a humble request for leadership, process, transparency, and organizational fidelity. And basically, these were Crew members, not CREW members, but CRU members. They were just inquiring, why are there no people of color in these leadership positions? Because Steve Sellers had just signed on as the new Crew Global President, and Mark Gauthier is the U.S. National Director. And they had just gotten these leadership positions. There was 2 positions open, and they were just like, how come you never hire minorities? And to try and mitigate this, Crew started having these training webinars about diversity and inclusion. I don't hate that. They were just talking about how they need to not be so racist, right? And of course, there was a bunch of conservative snowflakes who did not like this. They wrote this long-ass letter and sent it to Steve and Mark. They said in the letter that at least 1,000 people were mad, but they didn't have 1,000 signatures. I don't really have time to read this entire thing to you. It's over 150 pages. I do encourage you to go look for it yourself. I have included it in my sources. But this really long letter PDF thing that the anti-diversity people, I guess that would make them the racists. They were mad about all the diversity training. They were mad about people bringing up BLM. They were mad about people bringing up oppression, like, stuff that you would expect white conservatives to be mad about, right? I have not read this whole thing. I'm not going to pretend to have read this whole thing. So if there's things that are more offensive that I haven't found, I'm sorry. Likewise, if they made any good points, I sure didn't see them. Although I did find it interesting that they brought up in this letter that Cru has lost donors because of this LGBTQ thing. I skipped down to the area where they are complaining about all the CRT, and here is some of the things that they were mad about. If there was an inaugural event, it would be Cru 15. The entire program, main sessions, and seminars were given over to the most radical social justice and CRT communicators. This was organizational change, not officially led, but allowed to happen, and it happened again and again at Cru 17 and Cru 19. Sadly, I've lost a degree of respect for top Cru leadership for first letting this happen, and second for not fixing it when it did. Below are excerpts from Sandra Van Opstel's main session capture, the general tone and content of all three conferences, followed by several staff testimonies of what the experience has been like. So apparently this lady said, "While we built our megachurches, our country was building the largest school-to-prison pipeline in the world. People were gasping for air under the foot of greed and American exceptionalism, and we were singing, 'It's all about me and how I feel about you, Jesus,' a theology of intellect and intention, but not about action, and how we feel and think about how we live." I don't find anything wrong with that. That is true. God is not the only one who is offended. We are a stench to him. New buildings, lights, smoke, it's all idolatry, and the young generation will not be fooled by it. This generation resonates with the feeling and the tone of Amos when they look at churches that are disconnected from the cries of people suffering in their own backyard and our complicity in a racist structure, and they want to vomit. They smell our stench. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. True worship cannot exist without chasing social justice. We need worship that embodies justice. Inequality in housing and education are not political issues to care about. They are human realities. Immigrant children detained, incarcerated, and trafficked are not political issues. They are pastoral realities. Speaking truth to power is not an elective. It is an outgrowth of worship. Chasing justice is a responsibility of a disciple. I agree. We must speak truth to power, greed, idolatry, and white supremacy, not out there, in here, in how we operate, in how we get to decide who is human and not, in who we decide to shoot first without asking questions, and who we decide to elevate as leaders. The future of the church is young, black, brown, and yellow bodies. I like that. Obviously, the people who wrote this letter were not happy with it. Staff member at Cru 15 says, "At Cru 15, I attended a smaller group designed for staff to ask questions or talk about their feelings. Many people felt shocked from the main meeting and seminar talks of race, BLM, white guilt, and victim oppressor beliefs. The meeting really did nothing to help staff understand the answer to the question, why am I automatically considered racist because I'm in the majority culture? After the session was finished, I stopped to talk to my former campus area leader, who was a part of the Cru 15 conference team. He responded by basically saying, well, you better get used to it because this is the direction we're going now. If you can't get along with it, you will feel so uncomfortable that you will want to leave staff. This is not going away." They said, "In pursuing diversity, we have inadvertently adopted a system of unbiblical ideas that have led us to disunity. These concepts have created distrust, discouragement, and a host of other problems." But basically in this letter, they say Cru is being unbiblical and sowing disunity. You know, they're the type that's like, if you talk about racism, it's just as bad as being racist type people. Various anonymous testimonials called the organization's cultural competency training political and alleged anti-white American rhetoric. One anonymous staff, referenced as minority staff number 30, said the trend within Cru and the church at large represents a brand new religion of systematic racism, white privilege, and systems of power that labels all Christian theology a racist, oppressive ideology of whiteness. What does that mean? That's like reverse racism. Like this does not compute. One of the group's organizers is Scott Pendleton, chief of staff for Cru's Jesus Film Project. He worries, as the document states, that the emphasis on racial justice detracts from the heart of Cru's evangelism work. "We can be united and show the world that we love each other through our identity in Christ," he said, "not because we're trying to dismantle racist structures, though that has its place." Wow, Jesus, he wasn't political at all, and, race hasn't been used to justify abuse towards people of color within Christianity at all. Wait. No, that's wrong. Smith said he guided several initiatives cited and critiqued in the document, yet the authors did not contact him with their concerns. As parts of the letter called out Cru's cultural competency training and efforts to engage racial issues as worldly, deceptive, and unbiblical, he said he felt like, "I was being told that my very presence as a black man could cause Cru to mission drift." I forgot the microphone. I'm so sorry. It's been a long fucking day. Then there was another Zoom meeting with director Mark Gauthier, and the people who wrote that letter had the Zoom meeting, and they literally were so chicken shit that they turned off their cameras and used fake names because I guess they didn't want people to know that they were racist. But anyway, eventually he gave like a real non-answer to address both sides. The distribution of the research caused a breach in trust among some of our staff, and in particular our BIPOC staff. While their concerns of the group may have been well motivated, the manner in which the report was written and the distribution of the information was crushing to many of our BIPOC staff. The research effectively questioned all of the venues throughout Crew where we were talking about diversity, he said. For our BIPOC staff in particular, it raised the question of whether we were backing away. Whether or not we were backing away from our biblical pursuit of oneness and diversity, he said. Well, insofar as the research raised real issues, whether we like them or not, that is very helpful. However, the implications that are drawn from the research can lead one to believe that many of our diversity initiatives are unwelcome, ineffective, and constitute mission drift. Oh boy. Apparently Mark also was on Facebook following the police killings of George Floyd. Apparently Steve said, if I call this out specifically, why not every example of racism? Why not? That's the question, dude. Why not publicly and vocally stand for the sin of abortion, the horrors of women being trafficked, or for the assault on the biblical view of human sexuality? Some commented that the post felt tone deaf, eliciting the sentiment that all sins matter. So then, in response, top leaders at Crew said critical race theory has not been a part of internal leadership discussions, with Gauthier noting that the organization does not hold to or teach any worldly ideologies. So these people were just freaking out for nothing. Anytime they have to like self-reflect, they just can't handle it and they just freak out. All right, now we're going to talk about Surf the Nations. Sorry, that's Surfing the Nations. Surfing the Nations says that they are a humanitarian aid organization on paper, but in actuality, it is a Christian youth missionary organization that uses surfing as an evangelism tool.
Surfing the Nations is a nonprofit humanitarian organization headquartered in Wahiawa, Hawaii. Founded in 1997 with the goal of mobilizing this generation to serve and be leaders of positive influence both locally and internationally.
By the way, I got copyright claimed from Surf the Nations for using one of their promotional videos because they used a copyrighted song. They probably had permission and I don't. But anyway, I'm going to play a clip from my interview with Erin instead.
Do you think that the future of these, because obviously these mission organizations are going to try and evolve into the future. Do you think that's going to be getting more maybe overt and ridiculous like Surfing the Nations? Or are they going to go more, I would almost call the opposite, the Hut direction of we're trying to make this very legitimate. We're trying to make this very serious. We're almost covert with it. Like it's kind of, we're not advertising it. If you know, you know. If you want it, you want it. Where do you see the future of mission trips going so we can kind of spot these things maybe before they grow?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be more like Surfing the Nations. Like we're already seeing different smaller organizations pop up like that. Even when I was in school, there were just things that were, one was like Avanti Italiana, which is it's a missions thing in Italy. And it is considered to be like, it's obviously a missions thing, but it's not considered to be as like churchy or as, Christian as the other one. So they attract different people to those different missions organizations. And for Surfing the Nations, they do something that most organizations wish they could do, which is have, advertising that does not state where like what they are, because for most organizations now you can figure out what they are because they have something on their website, but because nobody has talked about it or exposed them enough, people don't know that Surfing the Nations is a Christian organization. That's what the missions is going to want to do. They're going to want to be just like that because it attracts the type of people they want at their organization. Surfing the Nations wanted new Christians to be there. Like they want people who don't know a lot about Jesus to be there.
Who don't know a lot about Jesus and are willing to throw their entire life behind what little they do know about him.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly what they want. And it's a very well done program for that age group too. Like they just plan it so perfectly where you want to be there. It's very like trendy looking compared to some of the other missions organizations. It's very trendy. So I think that they are going to try to put that out, but I think for some of them it will be impossible for them to come even close to what Surfing the Nations is doing because they're in places that people don't want to be. It's just harder to get the cool blonde kids to go to, whatever compared to going to Hawaii, even though that is who they want in their missions program. That's like who they want at YWAM. They want the like attractive white kids.
It's just like, you can't just throw something on there and call it a ministry. Surfing ministry? And guess what? They took that shit to North Korea. They didn't talk about God either. This is from Surfer Magazine. We went into North Korea to promote surfing as a tourist opportunity for them. North Korea does actually get tourists, not as much as other countries, but more than Westerners give them credit for. We got hooked up with the head of North Korea's tourist agency and worked with him to set up the first trip. We came over under the guise of sharing surfing with North Korea. We weren't allowed to use the word teaching. And you better not have been trying to convert those people either. Good grief. This guy said, 10 years ago I went to my boss and said, we've got to get into North Korea and go surf and do our thing over there. Oh my God, guys. How great would this be as a movie? Like, can we get some screenwriters onto this? And if you do make this movie, please hire me. I want to be a background extra. I want to be one of the fat people on the beach. He said that it was a great idea and challenged me to figure out how. Until, by coincidence, I met a guy who lives in South Korea and has been taking groups into North Korea for humanitarian work for a long time. They were mainly focused on clean water projects like digging wells. You know, they don't think about surfing very much. One day he was doing a project in North Korea and there was a hurricane swell near Japan that was pumping some pretty good surf into North Korean shores. We're not worried about tsunamis or earthquakes. We're worried about surfing those waves. This guy's a surfer, and after seeing the waves, knew that he had to get back there to surf. He knew about Surfing the Nations and the work we do, so he contacted us, and we set it up from there. You know what? All in all, good for the North Koreans, though. I bet they had a lot of fun surfing. Anyway, we have gone off on a tangent. We need to get back to the story here. This group was founded by Tom and Cindy Bauer. They used to be YWAM directors at YWAM Kona, and after some allegations of financial and spiritual abuse, they started their own thing, Surfing the Nations. But at no point during any of this have they come out and said that they are a Christian organization. Also, I want to get it out of the way and state that Cindy is ex-Mormon, and she's open about this. She's given interviews. Surfing the Nations lists on their website that they have gone on mission trips to Utah, so makes you wonder. And I did look into it, and there is surfing in Utah apparently, so who knew? So these are some pictures of Tom and Cindy Bauer baptizing people, and I chose them because I didn't want to show the actual person being baptized. I didn't want to show their face, but it looks like they're drowning them. And that's just a hazard of any baptism photos. This organization does not tell people that they are Christian, and so when they come to volunteer, they get completely bamboozled. And Tom and Cindy run Surfers Church, which I can only assume is the church that they make these people go to or heavily encourage them to. They got Surfers Coffee, which, by the way, Surfers Coffee and the thrift store that they own is staffed by these unpaid interns. Not even unpaid. They have to pay to do it. They also have to sort of pay fees and rent to live in the apartment complex that Tom and Cindy bought, and the living conditions there are deplorable, from what I've heard. I saw someone saying that they didn't have beds, they had to sleep on pool noodles. And also, they only feed them once a day. Yeah, so how's that for communal living? Ohana, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, they bought up a bunch of cheap property and literally gentrified it. Here's an interview where Tom is talking about how they completely fixed that neighborhood. It was so scary, and, you know, there was alcohol and strip clubs there, and now they have their little coffee shop and their thrift store.
Yeah, that's our 4 buildings, and that's even looks better than they did when we first took them over. So it is now a whole process of change that has taken place, and it wasn't really something that we anticipated. We just got it when we landed there after fundraising for 12 years to be able to purchase a property. We ended up purchasing what was an old bar.
An old bar?
And then next door to that, we found out was the second largest porn shop, Divine Pleasure.
A porn shop,
And then right next to that was a liquor store that sold everything from as simply illegal as cigarettes all the way up, as well as porn and porn toys.
Abuse store.
Yes, and then next to that was a strip bar that had sex trafficking and prostitution.
Yeah. What a neighborhood to move into.
Yeah, and then right behind that was an 8-bedroom brothel that we're now in the process of turning into the Community Outreach and Training Center. So all of those have been transformed, and it's been exciting to watch. And we have neighbors come and thank us, people just driving down the street that stop and say that this is just refreshing now.
Well, let me pause here now so that we can give our viewers.
I don't know. It always bothers me when, especially white people, talk about a neighborhood being bad, because it's like, what are you really saying? Like, I understand that there's a high rate of crime. That means there's probably a high rate of poverty. And how can we fix poverty? Don't make me say it, but socialism. Like, if people were paid fairly, if rent wasn't so high, if maybe there was a UBI, you know, we wouldn't have some of these issues. Also, you are a guest, maybe an invader, some people might say, to this area. And so it's really rich coming from you saying that it's a bad neighborhood and that you're going to fix it with your overpriced crap. I thought that they bought every single building on that street. I don't think they did, because I went into Google Maps and looked on Street View, and I also did an aerial view and saw the street that they're on, and they're like, oh, it's so horrible, it's so sketchy. Bitch, there's a fucking Wendy's on that same street. Anyway, I know too much about it, but yeah, Surf the Nations is headquartered in like an apartment building that is directly behind the coffee shop. Somebody said that that apartment building was supposed to be set aside for Section 8 housing, and of course they bought it up. So now volunteers get to sleep there. On this curriculum that they have, they also have rules, such as no talking about controversial topics, no woke. It just says no woke. As you can see, this schedule includes lots of Bible studies and other Jesus-related activities, you know, and I thought this was humanitarian. They don't tell you anywhere at all on the website, in any of their promotional materials, that this is a Christian organization. They say that they are an aid organization, that they're going to distribute food, supplies, whatever, to the local people. And then you get there and you find out that it's Christian, like heavily Christian. There's a whole curriculum you have to sit through, classes, confessions, Bible class, like everything. They also have all-night prayer sessions, kind of like IHOP, and they'll literally put you on the schedule. Like, your shift is 3 to 6, you're going to come pray. And they will literally go wake up unhoused people to pray for them. Like, imagine you're trying to fucking sleep. This fucking missionary comes and wakes you up to pray for you. And they're probably like, yeah, bro, I'll get my surfboard. Like, no, I can't handle it. I've also heard stories of the missionaries harassing non-believers or LGBTQ people, which does not surprise me. As well as reports that Tom and Cindy both make inappropriate, bigoted jokes at the expense of the LGBTQ community. All right, so you know I had to save the worst for last, and go ahead and check out the content warning on the screens and skip to this timestamp if you do not want to listen to this next part. There is a sexual abuse problem at Surf the Nations. If I had to be more specific, I would go ahead and just say it's Tom and Cindy's fault because it's their organization and this keeps happening. So, in 2018, a woman came forward on Twitter. She's on social media and you can find her pretty easily. She talks about this a lot and has been very brave about all of this, and she is going to help people by coming forward with this story. Saying that when she was 13, she was groomed and abused at YWAM Kona, which, if you remember, was headed by Tom and Cindy. She then alleges that this information was brought to Tom and Cindy, and not only did they not care, but they covered it up. And so you have to keep that in mind when you remember that Surfers Church, which is the church associated with Surfing the Nation, I'm guessing now that there's probably a reason why they want to have that legal distinction, because they currently employ a registered sex offender, Daniel Jones. He goes by Danny Jones now, and he is a worship leader. Yeah, I mean, he's on their Instagram, he's on the website. This is completely unacceptable. It's so dangerous. Surf the Nations has a children's ministry, and they're all at risk. I mean, the adults are at risk too, but seriously, you couldn't find anybody else to come be a worship leader? So, yeah, in conclusion, fuck Surf the Nations. Finally, we're going to talk about youth with a mission.
You have a God-given calling. a great purpose for your life. It's so important that you step into it, and we want to help you do it. Do you feel God is pulling you into this? Is your heart hungry for more? Then don't hold back. It's time to go.
This group is what inspired me to make this whole episode. I was like, well, if I talk about YWAM, I'm going to have to talk about the history of missions. And then if I talk about that, I'm going to have to talk about this and that and the other. And then I was like, why not just talk about all of them or a lot of them? And here we are. The reason why YWAM is so like prolific is because they are fucking huge. They have so many branches with over 650 bases in over 150 countries. They have boats. They have everything. YWAM has so many branches that they even have a Catholic branch. It's called Charisma. Look it up. One of the things that makes YWAM so bad, unique, is that they have a decentralized leadership structure. To them, that means that, it gives them more freedom, but in my opinion, that makes it harder to crack down on all the abuses. To be fair, there are directors of certain ministries within YWAM. Tom and Cindy Bauer were directors at YWAM Kona. Although we have global networks of leaders and elders, we do not have headquarters. Our decentralized structure gives room for leaders to emerge from many different cultures. Although oversight and support is exercised by our circles of eldership, Jesus, called area circle teams. They really just make up names, don't they? Each YWAM location has its own characteristics and ministry focus. They are all bound together by our common vision of waves of young people taking the good news to the whole world. You'll hear about that wave thing a lot. In addition, YWAM is cohesive through our shared purpose, beliefs, and values. Wherever possible, YWAM ministry centers are legally incorporated according to the laws of the land in which they live. Overall structure of YWAM aims to encourage the priesthood of all believers and the mobilization of young people to go into the world with the gospel. And these staff members are not being paid. The volunteers aren't either, but they're volunteers. That's kind of in the name. So if nobody's getting paid, there's no central leadership, and everyone is between the ages of 19 and 25, what do you think is going to happen? Like, there is unchecked abuse and power going on at these places. Nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. And it contributes to the overall toxic culture because it's just a bunch of young people who are trying their best and they want to help people, but at the same time, they're surrounded by a bunch of other miserable young people who have no leadership skills and do not know what they're doing. And I don't blame them, because they're also not being paid. And YWAM has hundreds of millions of dollars. So where's all that going? Also, did you notice how it says, YWAM doesn't pay a salary? We did in our early days, but it didn't last long. The money kept running out. Our leaders sought God's direction and sensed that our organization was to be different. Every YWAMer would be responsible to believe God to provide for their expense. It's like that Kenneth Copeland movie I talked about. God does my payroll. Founded by Loren Cunningham, Loren, and he was a young missionary in the Bahamas. He was a part of the Assemblies of God, which is a charismatic church, and that kind of informs a lot of stuff that's going to happen today. They're very much into visions and prophecy and laying of hands and like this real spiritual like overwhelm, this real like Jesus told me to do this and God told me to do that. Like, on that note, I want to talk about YWAM's official policy on exorcising demons. And no, I'm not kidding. Like, you think that the staff meetings at your job are unnecessary. They have whole ass policies about how to deliver demons, This is officially a policy from University of the Nations, which is YWAM's college that's not really a college in my opinion, but obviously they say, this is a messianic fulfillment. Everybody can do this. That's kind of a charismatic thing. They think everybody has spiritual gifts and everybody can deliver demons. So some of the classic symptoms of being possessed by demons would be violent reaction to the presence of the Holy Spirit, the name of Jesus, or mention of the cross or blood of Jesus. Reactions may include swearing, physical acts such as running away. Remember, when people are holding you down and trying to deliver you and it's very overstimulating and traumatizing, running away is actually a sign of being demon-filled. Foaming at the mouth or fighting. Speaking with another voice is another one. Some of the common things would be rolling your eyes, sudden sleepiness, outbursts of anger, addictions to alcohol, compulsions such as lust, fornication, pornography, perversions, homosexuality, stealing, murder, lying, suicide, and gluttony. Damn, there goes my whole weekend. Overwhelming abnormal emotions such as fear, depression, and anxiety. That's demons. Chronic illness that runs in the family is a demon. Loss of sleep and insomnia. I have struggled with insomnia before, and let me tell you, that shit does feel like a demon. Occult involvement or cult involvement. So, I mean, I wouldn't go there if I was them. And then they say, don't worry if you're confused about this, use your discernment, okay? Because one of the most common ways to know if someone is demon possessed is you just know it. You just know. And that's really all you need to base it on. One of the common manifestations when the power of God finally does come down, area of insanity in the family can manifest contortions around the mouth. Yawning, deep coughing, respiration. If you're breathing, pressure in the chest, pain, tingling sensation in the hands, that's not a heart attack, that's not a stroke, that's demons. That's what you do if you have demons. So that weird ass policy PDF thing was from the U of N, or the University of the Nations. They really want you to call it U of N. I think it's super lame. That is their Christian college, formed in 1978 in Kona, Hawaii. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what is taught at this university, and they have dubious accreditation, to say the least. Actually, on their website, they say, the U of N is unique in its international ministry training scope, with school locations in 160 nations and at 600 locations on 6 continents. Because national accrediting agencies have major differences in their systems, the U of N has not at present applied for any one nation's accreditation. They also have strict rules at their college. According to the handbook, no relationships of any kind, let alone homosexual ones. And there absolutely under no circumstances is there to be alcohol, eating disorders, or cutting. So, good luck if you were planning to do any of those things. Their college is affiliated with, but is not the same as DTS, which is the Discipleship Training Program, which all YWAM members have to go through, and that is a 6-month training program for YWAM. It consists of 3 months of lecture, 3 months of on-the-site training, and it costs anywhere from $5,000 to $9,000. And people have said that after you finish your DTS, you are encouraged to go either take more classes at U of N or become a full-time staff member, and staff members are not paid. I don't know why they call them staff then. Some of the things that you will learn in DTS would be the 7 Mountains Mandate, which is a Christian dominionist belief set. They want to control the 7 spheres or 7 mountains of society, and those would be family, religion, education, media, arts, entertainment, business, and government. It's associated with the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation, so a lot of conservative, charismatic people that we've covered on this channel, but I didn't know that it was really pioneered by some people we've talked about today. The movement is believed by its followers to have begun in 1975 with a purported message from God delivered to evangelicals. Lauren Cunningham, Bill Bright, and Francis Schaeffer, who we have not mentioned today, but he is his own unique person, ordering them to invade the 7 spheres of society, identified as, The idea was not seriously considered until 2000 during a meeting between Cunningham and Lance Wallano. The movement came to prominence after the 2013 publication of Wallano and Bill Johnson, remember him, Invading Babylon, the 7 Mountain Mandate. Lauren started YWAM in the early 60s, and by 1963 he got married to his wife, Darlene. In 1963 he had 20 volunteers stationed in various nations, and the Cunninghams were planning the mission's first summer of '69. Later in the year, YWAM teams were sent to the West Indies, Samoa, Hawaii, Mexico, and Central America. In 1964, the organization became non-denominational. Cunningham's accomplishments cannot be grasped without considering the gamble he took 4 years into the ministry and a dramatic incident that followed. Overseas missions in the 1960s were top-down and slow to innovate enterprises, and outreach across denominational boundaries was infrequent and problematic. But in 1964, Cunningham decided to leave the relatively safe cocoon of the Assemblies of God to open YWAM to all denominations. Denominational officials believed that Cunningham had proven himself with this idea of leading youth on short-term missions. They offered him a good salary, a desk job in the executive suite at headquarters in Missouri, whoop-de-doo, and a small staff. But they told him he had to limit mission trips to once a month and involve only teens from the Pentecostal Fellowship. That's weird. Instead, Cunningham resigned, unwilling to compromise on the vision he believed God had given him 8 years earlier. Millions of evangelistic young people from all denominations crashing like waves onto the shores of every continent. And let me tell you, every every single article I read referenced that vision. He was really into that wave crashing metaphor with the teens. I don't like it. Also in the late 70s, YWAM started their ship ministries. Mercy Ministries, which is their ship ministry. They, deliver aid, but also do medical missions. And they eventually branched off into Mercy Ships, which is operationally separated from YWAM. Whatever that means. Speaking of YWAM ships, I have a crazy story to read here for you. In 1978, a ministry to involve children and teens called King's Kids, don't like that name, was founded. Also that year, Don Stevens visited an old passenger liner in Venice, Italy called Victoria. Once again, Lauren's visions about the Mercy ships was confirmed and God spoke about a ship again. YWAM cautiously began negotiations to buy it. Don Stevens and other YWAMers lived on a campground with 400 outreach participants while negotiations took place. By 1979, the ship was paid for and towed to Greece to be renovated. The ship, renamed Anastasis, the Greek word for resurrection, was such a mess that the galley alone took 25 young people 3 weeks to clean. As the Anastasis was being prepped for ministry, YWAM also had teams visit refugee camps in Thailand. Gary Stevens, brother of Don Stevens, led a team of one of them. They did what even the refugees had been unwilling to do, shoveled out the human waste, repaired broken sewage pipes, and fixed toilets. Gary reported back that the refugees marveled. Here were young people who were paying their own way to come to do a job no one else would consider. Wow, I'm so sorry that the refugees didn't want to shovel shit in your fucking boat. Dude, are you hearing yourself? So now for the rest of YWAM's horror stories, and I will put on the screen when this section's going to be over. It's basically the entire rest of the YWAM section. I'm going to talk about a active shooter that came from YWAM in 2007, and then I'm going to talk about sexual abuse, and then we're going to run to the next section. So just a heads up. Okay, so in December of 2007, a man named Matthew John Murray took a gun and he started attacking the people at the YWAM Denver campus, killing 2. And this was in Arvada, which is a suburb of Denver. Then literally 12 hours later, after this initial shooting had happened and he was like on the run, people were looking for him, he went to a different church, New Life Church, 65 miles away, and he started shooting people in the parking lot. And this church was kind of on high alert because of the shooting that had just had happened 12 hours prior. So they got an armed guard who was a former police officer, and she shot him, but it didn't kill him. He eventually turned the gun on himself, and that's how he died. Overall, 4 people were killed and 5 were wounded. They interviewed the guard, and she said that during this moment, she was not scared. She prayed to God to protect her, and then she shot him. Then later we find out that this man actually had attended YWAM, and he was expelled for strange behavior. The police raided his home, and they found hundreds of CSA images on his computer, as well as some other strange things. He was looking up all sorts of different religions. He had been studying and obsessing about mass shootings and Googling them and doing research, and he was especially fixated on Eric Harris. He would post on different forums that he wanted to brutally kill all Christians. He left a paper trail is what I'm trying to say. So rest in peace to the victims, and I hope their families get some sort of peace and justice. This is just really random and really fucked up.
It was a tragedy that robbed the New Life Church of its innocence, as Pastor Brady Boyd put it. Today we look back at that fateful day and how the church has recovered in its aftermath.
He is dead, right? That's perfect.
The time is just after 1 p.m., December 9th, 2007. Morning Mass is wrapping up at New Life Church in Colorado Springs. A gunman who shot and killed 2 people at an Arvada Missionary Center just hours before moves toward his next target, 7,000 people still inside.
I didn't know he was coming. I just was going on a gut feeling.
Gina Som is on shift as a volunteer on the church security team. She's also a trained officer who carries a weapon. Immediately, she knows something's not right.
I heard a pop, 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 and that was him shooting and killing people in the parking lot of the church.
We'd later learn 2 sisters, Stephanie and Rachel Works, lost their lives in that moment. Now, the shooter plans to inflict more damage inside, where Gene is trying to make sense of the chaos.
People were screaming, get down, he's got a gun, and running past me. and I sprinted down the hall to where he was coming in.
Suddenly, she's face to face with the shooter, 24-year-old Matthew John Murray. G knows that she's the only one standing between him and hundreds more victims. He refuses to drop his weapon, so she takes action.
I had to kill him, but it was over in less than 3 minutes.
The memories of that day are still a part of New Life's identity, but for the better.
That shooting could have spelled the end of us. It could have brought this church to its knees. Instead, we have found a new sense of purpose.
Recently, the church got together not only to reflect on their loss, but to use their faith as their ammunition to persevere.
It's been actually a kind of a beautiful mix of joy and sadness and remembrance, but also kind of a resolve that we have to move forward.
Proof that time really can heal the deepest of wounds.
We're at a place now where we can breathe again and live again.
Now I want to talk about the rampant sexual abuse that is happening at YWAM. And no, I'm not saying that every single one of these branches has abuse, but when you have 600 branches and no central leadership, it just makes you wonder how much of the stuff is being suppressed and how many people, would be afraid to come forward. But either way, there are some documented instances of sexual abuse happening at YWAM, including in 2016, a man by the name of Mr. Choi was sent by YWAM to Cambodia, where he was then arrested for engaging in inappropriate relationships with a young woman. I looked at this link here, and it's pretty bad. There was also Jared Hayne, an athlete who played rugby, but he also was in the NFL. He has a long yet opaque history of sexual assault going back nearly a decade. In 2015, Hayne was accused of sexually assaulting a woman in San Jose during his time with the 49ers. The case never made it to criminal court. However, Hayne did settle with the accuser in civil court for around $100,000. Then, in 2018, Hayne was arrested in Australia on charges of aggravated sexual assault and inflicting bodily harm. While he was on bail, he attended YWAM Australia. I think YWAM Perth specifically. He would go to trial in 2019 and plead not guilty, eventually leading to the full dismissal of the jury in late 2020 after they failed to reach a unanimous verdict. A retrial would commence March 2021, and in May of 2021, Hayne would be convicted on the sexual assault charge, receiving a sentence of about 6 years. However, that ruling would be thrown out in February of 2022, with another retrial ordered, which then saw Hayne convicted again for the same crime in April of 2023. Just a few days ago, on June 11th, Hayne won on appeal and got the charges overturned again and is now currently a free man. And according to at least one article at YWAM Perth, it was just as bad as everywhere else with the victim blaming and the cover-ups. And then, of course, there is the allegations from Rebecca Lovelace, who said that she was assaulted at YWAM Kona, and the directors, Tom and Cindy Bauer, did nothing. She also said that Cindy basically said it was her fault. Not really a good place to be. All right, so that was pretty awful, huh? We're going to change it up now, and I'm finally going to show you my interview with Erin, but she had something really interesting to say about YWAM, and I thought it'd be a perfect place to end things.
So YWAM also is considered to be a cult within Christianity as well. When I was a missionary, there were people who were like, yeah, YWAM, they're culty. Like that
Stay away from them.
It was like that. It was that energy. So even within like the missions community, they're considered, like, for some denominations, they're considered to be the weird culty ones.
That's so interesting because YWAM is so huge that it almost seems like if everybody doesn't like them, then why are there so many?
Exactly. And they are the largest, I think it might be the largest missions organization in the world.
Obviously, it's not a cult, Erin. I mean, it says right on the website, they're not a cult. And it's not like people go on the internet and tell lies. And what does HUT stand for? Because I thought it was like Harding University training, but it's not.
It's Harding University Dakota, which is, Harding has a piece of land, a camp called Camp Dakota that they own. And then across the street is HUT. And HUT they call it Harding University Dakota.
Do you know off the top of your head all the countries and what their nicknames were?
So there's like refugee, and then there's like Africa. And I cannot remember what they call the one in Africa, but because everyone at Hut just calls it Africa compared to some of the other ones, like Stinking Creek is Appalachia.
That's so mean to call it that.
It is. They just love picking on poor people and people of color.
Okay, so we got the garden. That sounds self-explanatory. Kirakunda?
Is that Africa?
It's near the garden. It does appear to be a mud hut in the northwest corner of
Oh
the
yeah,
map.
yeah. Then that would be Africa.
Hugh Tanago. I
trying
don't
to-
see Wei. I remember you talking about it.
Wei.
Oh,
That's what
I said it wrong.
Yeah.
Wow. There you
Yeah,
go.
it's on there. So yeah, Wei.
I'm gonna make fun of myself in the editing. Don't worry. We have the market, Stinking Creek. You said that's like, is that like in a trailer?
It's varied throughout the years, but when the first time I went, they had a like building and then like a trailer that was disgusting, and they had a bunch of like appliances out in the yard. Yeah, so
This sounds like the Disney Imagineers being told to create like an
Okay, now make a
immersive
place for poor
but
people.
offensive Appalachian environment. Like, we're gonna put some decorations out front, and it's like, have y'all ever spoken to anyone from these regions without trying to throw a Bible at them?
that is it. That is why these are crazy. And it's almost like they didn't try to, even though they say that they tried really hard to make it so accurate and all that. But I'm also like, you guys, I don't know. They just chose
I
the
see
most
the vision, but I don't like it.
I don't know. They could ask people, like there are international students, there are just people on campus that Harding has access to that have lived those experiences. They never ask them at all. Like they won't ask, they're going off of what they see on Google or what they experienced as missionaries. A lot of the people who were a part of Hut and like the formation of it, they were missionaries at one point. So they're going off of like their experience, which still is like not an accurate experience. But like we had international students that would be able to speak to the culture and the issues way better than any of them could.
And then the last two, Chang Chang and City Soleil.
Yes.
What's City Soleil?
I think Haiti.
And so, can you explain like how like the little family structures work and how you have to like allot resources and stuff? And can you go into that?
When you arrive at Hut, you are split up into countries, and then within your country, you're a family. So when I was a refugee, that was my family. And when you first get there, they do a simulation of you being at an airport in a foreign country. This is all like a white American view of it. So they make it like the most, racially inappropriate thing ever.
I wanted to ask, but I didn't know if it was okay. Did you get treated differently than some other students?
I feel like there is a overcompensation. So I think because there's a market simulation, and every evening you go to the market to buy your food. And in the market simulation, when I have worked at Hut, I've been like an American tourist. So instead of pretending to be a, African, and it's just, yeah, it would have made more sense for them to like actually put me in a role that fits my race, but they did not.
You said in one video that a lot of people like they sleep on the ground when it's like extremely cold, and they're just supposed to like, this is how it's gonna be in such and such country, so you got to suck it up.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. Every country has like a building that represents the actual country. So like in Chongqing, which they have a
you didn't name it.
They have like a house on stilts like you would see in China. And then up in Africa, they have a mud hut that they built. So you live within those structures. So I was once in Wei, which I believe it was Guatemala. And there was like one bed in the girls' building. And it was like 30 degrees out. And we were sleeping in that bed. 4 of us or 3 of us were in a twin bed because that's what we had. That's where you sleep. Or you can sleep on the ground. If you're a refugee, you sleep on the ground. That's a simulation.
If this is a camp, who would be the camp counselors? Is it just other students, or are there like trusted adults? Like I'm just, the whole thing reminds me of like the Stanford prison experiment or something. Like it should not, these people should not be in charge.
Yeah, that's what everyone says. There are adults there, but they aren't as involved in the simulation as the students are. So for the 2-week program, students, they work at Hut. They have like a character to play. So some of them will be guards, or you'll be a part of the UN, or you'll be from Africa. So like you have a role that you're playing within the simulation for the whole 2 weeks. So it is all students, which makes it horrible because there are people who like are intentionally making the experience bad for you just because they like don't like you at school, or like
Yeah.
there are people who make it good for you and they're like sneaking you food and money because they like you. It's something that like is definitely abused. And the type of people that Hut attracts, they're people that
I'm
are
imagining
going to make
like
it miserable.
somebody like, yes, I got the TSA. I'm gonna be really mean to people as they come in.
That's no people, yes, and you get to like carry a fake gun. They like so there are people who are just like, yay, I'm gonna be a part of customs. It's bad. A lot of people want to be the mentally ill woman in the market. It is as bad as you think it is. And they have this simulation of just a woman who's crazy in the market, and she's like dirty and is like grabbing people. And it's just like, it's the worst thing ever. Like, it is horrible. The first time I did Hut, it was actually when I was a high school student. I did a program at Harding called Honor Symposium, and it's kind of like a fake 2-week college experience for kids that are going into their senior year. It's the way that Harding gets us to want to go there because we make all these friends and all of that. Part of it was they took us to Hut for a night, and they told us nothing. There's no consent at all. Like they don't let us know that we won't be eating. They don't let us know what shoes to wear. Like they tell us nothing. My parents had no idea when I was a high school student. They didn't know I went to Hut. And like I was eating a thing of rice for the evening. You know, like they had no idea. There's no consent. Once you go to Harding, you know what it is and you're able to talk to people. But up until then, you don't really know what it is, and it's very hush hush. Like there are people who actually are upset with me and mad at me for talking about Hut because I've ruined the experience now.
That's messed up.
Yeah. I get messages like you're hurting so many people, you're ruining it, and I'm like, it needs to be exposed because people deserve to know. They tell you that if you have medication, you need to let them know, kind of like a camp situation of like, okay, like you have this, but there are people that I know that have like eating disorders or things where they need to be eating when they take their medicine or whatever it is. And because of like the culture of Hut, it's embarrassing to be like, I need to eat food. It's embarrassing to be like, I need to go to the main building and eat a piece of bread while I take my antidepressant. Like that's so embarrassing and shamed upon because you're ruining the experience. Like you're taking yourself out of the simulation by giving yourself what you need. What's crazy is I don't think I'm an asthmatic and I didn't know to bring my inhaler to Hut. And I should have known that, like, especially when I was a kid, like my parents would have been like, no, like you need to bring your inhaler. But I had no idea where I was going.
Yeah.
In high school, it is very embarrassing. And it's such an intimidating time to be there. Like you have the counselors that you really want them to like you because there's like social connections there that you want once you go to school there. And it's just like, it's a mess. So there are a lot of students who, when they go to Hut, they end up like, sadly slipping back into like eating disorders, or they end up messing up whatever medication thing they have going on. Once you're an adult, I think we had to sign a waiver when I did it within like as a student because I was over the age of 18.
Did people have to hunt for their food at Hut?
Yeah, they have to hunt for their food.
It's like they have stores in these
Exactly.
places. Like this isn't even accurate.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's like the most dramatic interpretation. And they have like since you only get so much food and you want to eat, especially if you're doing the 2-week program, which I thank goodness did not do that, but like you are hungry. So they like will kill animals and eat them. Whatever is around. And I think in the market they sell like goats and some other animals that you can buy. Your family can buy them to kill.
You said something about empathy hacking, and you
Mhm.
said you didn't coin that term, but I think you did. I've never heard it before.
I mean, I've never heard it either, but that's exactly what it is. It's just like they're trying to generate empathy in a bunch of like rich white students as fast as possible to get them on the
Mhm.
mission field. So they are putting you in situations that are horrible. Like experiencing HUT does not feel good. So then all these people are like, oh my gosh, this is just how like people in Africa feel. This is how people,
Mhm.
which it's not, because it's like so you get to go home afterwards with all that. So it's not actually, I don't know, I don't think they're actually building empathy, but I think it gives them the illusion that they are building
Yes.
empathy.
It reminds me of like when Tyra Banks pretended to be homeless. It's not the same. I know what you're
Oh my
trying to do, but that's not
The
how we do
safety
that.
net we all know is underneath you overrides the legitimacy of this entire operation.
The only cool part about HUT is there is a learning aspect of it. There are times where you're able to learn how to like build a well. Like they'll teach you, you know, just like what a well is like, or you'll learn how to garden. They have a garden. They also teach you how to do some medical mission stuff as well. Like if you're ever in a place where people really like are really malnourished, they teach you how to make something for them that will help them without any resources. So there are some like cool things that I've learned from HUT. That's the learning experience. The learning experience is also just like suffering through it. Like honestly, they want you to suffer so that you can like empathize with other people.
As someone who has such a robust background in missionary work from every single angle, I know we've talked a lot to people who were missionaries or returned, and they, you know, there's a lot of guilt over what was participated in. I was a gentrifier, I did this, I did that, and the other. But at the same time, we also like to acknowledge that going on a mission trip, wanting to do that, says good things about you. So how would you, as someone who your experience with this stuff is so unique and so well-rounded, what advice would you maybe give to people who went on mission trips or people who are grappling with that for ways they can put those skills to good use or put their life experience to, you know, to use it for something more positive, or even just, you know, kind of rectify, you know, those tough feelings about that stuff?
I think one of the best things to do is to get into activism. If you did mission work, get into activism, because a lot of the same skills that we have from that translate to that. And it's actually for things that are great for the world. Find a cause that you love and become an activist, because they need people who are able to communicate with random people on the internet or the streets. Like we need that in activism communities. That is the perfect segue. If you are feeling like you want to do something with those skills, do activism. And I think working through the guilt and the just the weird feelings of knowing that you were a part of something that like is terrible, and it links back to like every terrible thing that has happened in the world, missions has been a part of it. I think that just like educating yourself on colonization is like the most important thing, because there are a lot of people who've deconstructed that were missionaries that have done all the things and they have not like decolonized any of their worldview at all. So they're still doing the things that they did as missionaries, but now it's here in our backyard. They need to learn how to decolonize. We all do. And yeah, so that's would be my main advice. Also, like the financial investment, that's the part that's like crazy to think about, is how much money is thrown into this. Like it's insane. Like I think for my mission trips alone, it's been easily over $20,000. Like, yeah, 20,000 easily.
Yeah, they keep all that.
Yes, they keep literally every penny. So,
do you have social media you want to plug or anything?
Yeah, you just follow me on TikTok at Erin Ray, which is ErinRaii.
I'll put it on the screen. Thank you so much for talking to us, Erin. This has been a really good time. I want to say a blast, but it's always like we're talking about serious shit, but we're having a good time.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have met you. In conclusion, yes, some people do go on mission trips for white savior reasons, but I would argue that most people, especially when they join these youth missionary organizations, are doing it for good reasons. They really do want to help people, and plus it's a part of their religion, and it's sold to them as this amazing adventure, right? I can see why they do it, and I'm certainly not mad at anybody, especially watching this, who has ever been on a mission trip. I am not judging you. I am not mad at you. I'm mad at these organizations who allow abuse to happen. I think they do prey on young people, especially if you are a young Christian and you just kind of left home for the first time. You're trying to find yourself. You're trying to figure out what you believe. You are so full of passion for the Lord. You want to travel. You want to make friends. I totally get it. I wish we lived in a perfect world where we didn't have to rely on the church to provide social services to people, but that's just not how it is. That's just not the reality of it. And of course, there are mutual aid organizations. There are humanitarian aid organizations. There are people, there are activists who are doing hard work on the ground and helping society in a very good way. But like Erin was saying, if you really were into missions and you love helping people, you should probably take that energy and do activism, and there's all kinds of ways to get involved. There's so many people who are like-minded who want to help the world and want to do their best and do their part for humanity, and so there absolutely is room to still do that. A lot of heavy stuff we talked about today. It's really fucked up that these organizations have gotten away with concealing abuse for a long time, especially abuse that isn't considered serious by other people, like spiritual abuse. That is also very important, and a lot of these groups are referred to as cult-like because they are so high control. They do have such groupthink. They peer pressure you. They have this toxic environment. These people are burnt out, overworked, not paid at all, have to raise their own money. Like, they have to obey. They have to respect authority. They're not allowed to speak out. Like, what kind of, Christian organization is that? You're supposed to be helping people, and they just can't. A lot of these groups are unorganized. They're not even barely officially affiliated with each other, like YWAM. Like, they have all these branches and they're all their own legal entity. There's no oversight. They have millions of dollars, a lot of these groups do, and they're not paying their missionaries. Maybe they're helping communities locally, maybe, and I appreciate, the ones that have the medical missions, but I wish it didn't have to be like that. I wish that we hadn't exploited these countries, robbed them of their resources, stripped them of their culture, forcefully converted them, and then show back up to add insult to injury. Like, I don't like it. And, we got to channel that. We got to channel that into something. And so, yeah, I'm kind of all over the place with this conclusion. This is a very long episode. I worked really hard on this episode, and it took me a long time, several months. I interviewed Erin back in February, and it's just been crazy, and I tried my best, and I even had James come on, and so sorry if I got some of the church history wrong. Sorry if I didn't bring up specific instances. What do you guys think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Have you ever gone on a mission trip? What was it like? Do you have any lasting memories? I don't know. Just tell me what you think. I worked really hard. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for sticking with me. I know it's been long. I tried to shove a bunch of information in, and I just get carried away. But yeah, go follow Erin on social media. Go follow me on social media if you want. Also, extra special thank you to Erin for helping me. She helped me throughout this entire process. I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of follow-up stuff I needed, and she was always there to answer my questions, and she's just super informed on this subject, and I really hope you go follow her on social media because she's amazing. If you want to support our ministry, we do have Patreon and YouTube memberships. They both get you access to the Discord, behind-the-scenes videos, and all kinds of good stuff. We have a new merch store, fundyfridays.shop. We got all kinds of new designs, including Overweight Sexually Broken Loser, the new version, and Fungi Fridays, the new version. We also have a brand new $1 tier on both Patreon and YouTube memberships, and this tier is the exact same as the other ones. You get the same exact benefits. It's just a cheaper option because some people only have $1 and they want to give me $1. And I really appreciate anything you guys give. You don't have to give any at all, but it does pay for me to do this full time. We pay all of our bills through Patreon. Sometimes AdSense makes money. It really depends on the copyright status that month. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And you do get fun benefits like access to the Discord, a discount on merch, and behind the scenes videos. And we do watch parties on Mondays. And so that's been really fun. I got all my sources in the info box. And I don't think there's anything else to say. Good stuff coming up. And I love you guys. And I hope you have a very blessed day. Happy Pride. I'll see you later. Are you comfortable talking about Harding? We're not going to talk. Would you like to talk shit, or would you like to have a good portrayal of it?
I talk shit. I mean,
Okay,
I feel like
okay.
I'm
I don't
okay
know.
with